The water does not merely shift. It begins to suffocate. Deep in pelagic blue, a massive school of silverfish is moving. Millions of individual minds are wired together by millions of years of evolutionary programming, designed to keep them alive in an ocean that wants to consume them. But today, that very programming is about to be weaponized against them. The water around the school begins to pulse with a strange, rhythmic pressure. It is not the chaotic thrashing of a predator rushing blindly into the fray. It is something far more terrifying. It is deliberate. The school reacts exactly as its DNA commands. It condenses. The fish pull tighter and tighter together, a shimmering, panic cyclone of scales and muscle, rotating in a desperate attempt to place bodies between themselves and the open water. They believe they are building a fortress of numbers. They believe they are executing a flawless defensive maneuver. They are entirely wrong. They have just built their own prison. Circling this living, spinning sphere are shapes of sleek, calculated gray. They do not dart. They do not sprint. They glide with a chillingly measured calm. These are bottlenose dolphins, and they are not here to chase prey. They are here to orchestrate a physical and psychological collapse. To understand the true dominance of the dolphin, you must strip away the romanticized myths of playful, smiling ocean wanderers. What circles this terrified sphere of fish is an apex intelligence, a highly social, profoundly strategic predator that governs not by overpowering its victims with brute force, but by systematically rewriting their behavior. The dolphins know exactly what the fish will do before the fish do it themselves. The prey's path is already pre-written, encoded in their survival instincts. The dolphin simply takes that code and alters the variables, forcing the fish to trap themselves. The manipulation begins invisibly, in a realm of sensory input that the human ear cannot even perceive. The dolphins unleash a barrage of acoustic control. They emit rapid, machine gun sequences of high-frequency clicks, driving sound waves through the dense water column. This is not communication. This is biological sonar, an echolocation system so advanced it makes modern submarine technology look primitive. The sound waves strike the swirling mass of fish, bouncing off their swim bladders, their bones, the microscopic variations in the density of their flesh. The echoes return to the dolphins, received through their lower jaws and channeled directly into their massive, highly folded cerebral cortices. In a fraction of a millisecond, the dolphin's brain renders a flawless, three-dimensional topographical map of the entire school. They do not just see a ball of fish. They see the exact density of the core. They see the precise depth of the formation. They track the velocity and the movement vectors of every edge. They measure the fear. With this acoustic grid constantly refreshing in their minds, the dolphins do not need to guess where the weak points are. They already know. They position themselves at the exact mathematical coordinates, where the fish are most likely to attempt a breakout. The hunters form a dynamic, shifting perimeter, a living cage. If the school attempts to elongate and slip away, a dolphin makes a high-speed pass along the flank, not to bite, but to generate a massive pressure gradient. The turbulence of the dolphin's wake hits the fish like a physical wall, forcing them to turn back inward. If a school tries to dive into the dark safety of the abyss, the dolphins execute violent, concussive tail slaps at the surface. The shock waves travel downward, an invisible acoustic ceiling crashing down on the fish, driving them back up into the light. When the perimeter needs to be tightened, the dolphins release perfectly timed, spiraling nets of bubbles. To the fish, these ascending columns of air are terrifying. Fish rely on a lateral line, a highly sensitive network of neuromass running down their sides, to detect water displacement, vibration, and contrast. Their entire existence depends on this sensory algorithm to maintain their synchronized swimming. The bubbles represent abrupt, chaotic contrast. They are tactile and visual barriers that the lateral line cannot process. The dolphins are effectively hacking the sensory algorithms of their prey. Every signal the fish receive, the pressure walls, the acoustic shock waves, the blinding bubble nets, screams at their nervous system that the only safe direction is inward. The school compresses further. The bait ball becomes a solid, writhing mass. Oxygen levels within the center of the sphere begin to plummet. The fish at the core are suffocating, while the fish on the outer edges are trapped in a state of maximum aerobic output, their muscles burning through glycogen reserves in an endless, terrifying sprint to nowhere. The dolphins, however, are operating on an entirely different physiological economy. They possess incredibly flexible respiratory strategies. Their muscles are packed with a specialized ratio of fast-twitch fibers for explosive acceleration, supported by massive stores of myoglobin that hoard oxygen, allowing them to alternate between effortless gliding and sudden, blinding speed. While the fish are drowning in their own lactic acid, exhausting their metabolic fuel, the dolphins are simply pacing themselves. They rotate roles. One enforces a perimeter, while another rests. They are actively conserving stamina, while guaranteeing the total exhaustion of their prey. It is an economic war of attrition, and the dolphins hold all the capital. Only when the bait ball is perfectly compressed, when the fish are utterly exhausted and paralyzed by their own defensive instincts, does the tempo shift. The orchestration turns into execution. The dolphins accelerate through the outer layer of the sphere. They do not slash wildly. They select targets with terrifying efficiency. A concussive strike from a tail stuns a dozen fish at once. A snap of the jaws removes another. Yet, even as they feed, the structure of the trap never falters. The dolphins on the perimeter maintain the pressure, ensuring the sphere remains intact. This is not the chaotic feeding frenzy of solitary sharks. This is a highly coordinated, sociologically complex division of labor. This level of coordination requires more than just instinct. It requires culture. The bottlenose dolphin possesses a brain architecture deeply wired for complex problem-solving and social learning. The tactics they are deploying are not merely genetic reflexes. They are traditions. Within the pod, calves watch the adults. They observe the angles of the perimeter, the timing of the bubble nets, the precise frequency of the echolocation clicks. They practice these maneuvers, refining them over years. The knowledge of how to manipulate 1 million fish into a tight, helpless sphere is passed down through generations. It is an inherited intellectual weapon. And this intellect is not confined to the deep pelagic blue. The dolphin's ability to rewrite prey behavior adapts flawlessly to entirely different terrains. In the shallow, murky estuaries and coastal mudflats, where a bait ball is impossible, the bottlenose dolphin deploys a different, yet equally psychological masterpiece of manipulation. Imagine a school of fish resting in the shallow water, feeling secure in a habitat too constrained for large predators to maneuver easily. A single dolphin approaches, but it does not charge. Instead, it begins to swim in a wide, deliberate circle around the fish. As it swims, it drags its powerful tail fluke through the soft sediment of the seafloor. A thick, blinding plume of mud begins to rise, churning upward to the surface. The dolphin completes the circle, closing the loop. The fish are now surrounded by an impenetrable ring of suspended sediment. To the fish, whose lateral lines and vision are instantly overwhelmed by the opaque turbulence, this mud ring is perceived as a solid, collapsing wall. The panic sets in. The water inside the ring is clear, but the perimeter is a terrifying unknown. Their evolutionary programming kicks in again, offering only one escape route from a tightening horizontal trap: vertical flight. The fish launch themselves out of the water, breaking the surface, leaping blindly into the open air to clear the mud wall. But the dolphin is already waiting. Along with the rest of its pod, it simply floats on the outside of the ring, mouths open, catching the fleeing fish midair. The dolphins do not have to hunt the fish in the murky water. They psychologically persuade the fish to leave their primary medium of survival. They trick the prey into abandoning the ocean entirely and delivering themselves directly into the jaws of the predator. Beneath these hunting masterclasses lies a society built on Machiavellian complexity. The pod is not just a family. It is a political arena. Dolphins form intricate, shifting alliances. Males will form long-term, tightly bonded coalitions, working together not just to hunt, but to aggressively herd and isolate females during the mating season. The behavioral manipulation they inflict upon fish is mirrored in how they manipulate each other. There are dominance hierarchies to navigate, favors to exchange, and punishments to dispense. The authority required to coordinate a flawless bait ball hunt is established through complex internal social negotiations. When a dolphin dictates a movement of a fish, it is drawing upon a deep, evolutionary well of social intelligence and coercive strategy, and their influence bleeds far beyond their own species. When the dolphins construct a bait ball in the open ocean, they are not just feeding themselves. They are terraforming the biological landscape. The compression of the fish draws the attention of the entire pelagic ecosystem. Gannets and shearwaters plummet from the sky, like feathered missiles, piercing the water to snatch fish from the upper layers of the sphere. Sharks sense the low-frequency vibrations of struggling prey and converge from the deep, tearing through the lower sections of the ball. Tuna and marlin join the fray, capitalizing on the dense concentration of calories. Yet, amidst this absolute chaos of multi-species predation, the dolphin remains the unquestioned conductor of the orchestra. It was their acoustic engineering and hydrodynamic pressure that built the arena. The sharks and the birds are merely opportunistic guests at a feast the dolphins designed. In some coastal regions of the world, this capacity to manipulate behavior crosses the boundary into human interaction. Dolphins have been documented actively cooperating with artisanal human fishers. The dolphins will herd schools of fish toward the shoreline, driving them into the waiting nets of the humans. In the ensuing panic, the fish that scatter or bounce off the nets become easy, disoriented prey for the dolphins. It is an interspecies collaboration that proves the absolute fluidity of their tactical genius. They are capable of adjusting the geometry of fear not just for their own pod, but in perfect synchronization with an entirely alien apex predator standing on the shore. Of course, the prey do not simply surrender to extinction. Evolution is a continuous, desperate dialogue. Over countless generations, some species of schooling fish have begun to adapt. They learn to recognize the specific acoustic signatures of dolphin echolocation. When they hear the clicking in the distance, they alter their schooling depth, diving into colder, darker waters before the perimeter can be established. They adjust the tightness of their formation, attempting to deny the dolphins' initial panic response. The fish push back. But the dolphins are not bound by slow genetic mutation alone. Their cultural learning allows them to iterate and adapt their tactics in real time. They continually refine their approach, staying one step ahead in the evolutionary arms race. Their control is not a static absolute. It is a dynamic, living strategy that constantly evolves to outpace resistance. When you observe a bottlenose dolphin breaking the surface, riding the bow wake of a ship, it is easy to misinterpret their agility as mere playfulness. It is easy to look at the curve of their jaw and see a permanent, benign smile. But that perception is a human vulnerability. Beneath that charismatic surface lies a mind of chilling calculation. They are architects of inevitability. They do not rely on the desperate, chaotic chase that defines so much of the animal kingdom. They do not engage in a fair fight. They create conditions where the prey's own desperate attempts to survive become the exact mechanism of their demise. The fish in the bait balls swim until their hearts give out, believing with every frantic thrust of their tails that they are finding a way out. But there is no way out. The corridors of escape were closed before the attack even began. The speed, the direction, the density of the school, every variable was determined by the predator. The dolphins dictate the boundaries of reality for those caught within their perimeter. They govern through a terrifying, invisible persuasion, proving that true power in the ocean is not the ability to outswim your prey. It is the ability to make your prey swim exactly where you want them to go. There is no eruption of violence, no chaotic rupture of the surface. The ocean simply begins to compress the concept of distance. A solitary sardine, sensing a shift in the hydrodynamics of the current, breaks away from the collective safety of its school and launches itself into the endless, featureless expanse of the open blue. It kicks its tail with frantic, explosive energy, muscles instantly flooding with lactic acid as anaerobic survival pathways ignite. It darts sharply to the left, then arcs violently upward, attempting to shake the shadow trailing behind it. But the shadow does not panic. The shadow does not surge in a desperate attempt to close the gap. Instead, it settles into a rhythm. It calculates. The distance between the hunted and the hunter does not collapse all at once. It erodes millimeter by millimeter with a mathematical and terrifying patience. The architect of this inevitable erosion is the Atlantic bluefin tuna. In the boundless pelagic realm, where there are no coral reefs to hide within, no muddy estuaries to mask an approach, and no shadows to conceal an ambush, survival is dictated by an entirely different set of rules. The tuna does not rely on the psychological deception of the octopus or the geographical traps of the grouper. Its dominance is rooted in absolute, unyielding physiological supremacy. It does not dictate where a chase will end. It dictates when the prey's biology will completely fail. This is not hunter space. This is a manipulator of time. To comprehend the bluefin, you must view it not merely as a fish, but as a biological engine engineered for sustained high-velocity output at a scale almost unmatched in the natural world. Its body is the ultimate expression of fluid dynamics, a rigid, streamlined torpedo forged for the sole purpose of moving through a dense medium with zero wasted energy. Unlike lesser predators that thrash their entire bodies to generate thrust, the tuna's core remains stiff. Propulsion is generated almost entirely by a crescent-shaped caudal fin sweeping back and forth, a design that flawlessly minimizes hydrodynamic drag while maximizing forward thrust. Even the exterior of the animal is optimized for frictionless flight. Its scales are microscopic and deeply embedded into the skin, smoothing the flow of water over its flanks. At high speeds, its pectoral fins retract seamlessly into specialized grooves along its sides, transforming the animal into a flawless biological missile. But the true terror of the bluefin tuna lies hidden beneath this sleek exterior, within the complex plumbing of its cardiovascular system. The vast majority of fish in the ocean are ectothermic. They are prisoners to the temperature of the water that surrounds them. When the ocean grows cold, their muscles cool, their metabolic rates plummet, and their reaction times grow sluggish. The sardine, fleeing for its life, operates under this physiological curse. The bluefin tuna does not. Through a miraculous evolutionary adaptation known as the rete mirabile, a dense, interwoven network of veins and arteries acting as a countercurrent heat exchanger, the tuna is able to trap and conserve the metabolic heat generated by its massive flanks of red muscle. It effectively achieves regional endothermy, keeping its core temperature, its brain, and its eyes significantly warmer than the frigid ocean water it navigates. This thermal superiority is the ultimate weapon. Warm muscle fibers contract with far greater force and efficiency than cold ones. A warm brain processes visual stimuli and calculates interception angles in fractions of a millisecond. While the sardine operates at the absolute mercy of the ocean's temperature, the tuna brings its own internal furnace to the hunt. Because of this engine, the pursuit becomes a deeply asymmetrical war of metabolism. The chase is never reckless. The tuna will rarely engage in a blind, energy-wasting sprint. Instead, it aligns the trajectory with the fleeing sardine, pacing the prey, matching its speed just a fraction below maximum output. This is a calculated choice. The tuna is intentionally pushing the prey into a state of metabolic crisis, while actively preserving its own stamina. Every erratic dart, every sudden evasive twist the sardine makes rapidly depletes its finite stores of glycogen. Its muscles, operated without sufficient oxygen, begin to drown in a buildup of lactic acid. The tuna, however, is built for the marathon. Its dark, myoglobin-rich red muscle tissue acts like an oxygen reservoir, continuously fed by a massive heart and an enormous gill surface area that extracts oxygen from the water with brutal efficiency. The bluefin processes the chase aerobically, clearing metabolic byproducts almost as quickly as they are generated. The predator breathes while the prey suffocates in its own effort. The tuna understands that exhaustion is not a sudden, theatrical collapse. It is a slow, incremental failure of the nervous system. The hunter watches with massive, highly adapted eyes, lenses perfectly tuned for stark contrast of pelagic blue, tracking the minute cadence of the sardine's tail beats. It waits for the microscopic signs of decay. The sardine's turning radius begins to widen by an inch. Its reaction time elongates by 1/100th of a second. The erratic bursts of speed flatten out into a sluggish, desperate wobble. The prey's biological clock has run out. Only then, recognizing that the threshold of failure has been crossed, does the tuna accelerate. The final gap is closed in a singular, decisive surge of power. The kill itself takes less than a second, but the control was exerted over miles. This form of dominance dictates the structure of the entire open ocean. By relentlessly targeting the individuals that fatigue first, the bluefin tuna acts as a great evolutionary filter of the pelagic zone. It forces prey species into an unending arms race. Only the absolute fastest, most enduring sardines and mackerel survive to pass on their genetics. The tuna does not just consume the lower trophic levels. It violently sculpts their physiology over millions of years. It forces prey to swim faster, to school tighter, and to push their own limits. Yet, when schools of prey tighten their formations to defend against a circling tuna, they unwittingly aid their own destruction. In a dense, packed school, the fish at the center find themselves competing for oxygenated water. To conserve energy and defend against a predator, they cluster together, but in doing so, they choke each other. The tuna simply circles the periphery, a warm-blooded sentinel, waiting patiently for the moment the school's collective cohesion fractures under the invisible weight of metabolic stress and oxygen deprivation. However, the universe demands a price for this level of supremacy. The supreme advantage of the bluefin tuna is also its most profound vulnerability. They are obligate ram ventilators. This means they lack the buccal pumping mechanism that allows other fish to draw water over their gills while stationary. The tuna must move forward to force water through its mouth and across its gill filaments. If it stops swimming, it begins to drown. The very physiological engine that grants it infinite stamina also condemns it to a life of perpetual, restless motion. A tuna can never hover over a reef to rest. It can never reverse into a cave to hide. It is bound to the endless blue forward momentum of its own biology. This makes their open water supremacy a terrifying liability when they encounter constraints of a human world. When a bluefin is drawn into a purse seine net or hooked on a long line, it cannot stop to assess the situation. It cannot simply wait out the entanglement. Confinement is an immediate death sentence. The endurance machine that can outlast any prey on Earth suffocates the moment its momentum is stolen. Furthermore, the sheer caloric demand of fueling a warm-blooded, continuously swimming body is astronomical. The bluefin is a prisoner to its own appetite. They are forced to undertake colossal transoceanic migrations, crossing entire basins from the Gulf of Mexico to the Mediterranean, endlessly chasing the seasonal blooms of productivity. If prey densities drop due to changing ocean temperatures or shifting currents, the tuna cannot simply hunker down and wait. It must burn massive amounts of fuel to find more fuel. The animal that holds the power to dictate the exact moment its prey will collapse remains entirely subservient to the macro cycles of the global climate. There is a subtle, almost invisible social choreography to their hunting as well. While often viewed as solitary, nomadic missiles, bluefin tuna will frequently coordinate in loose, unspoken alliances. When multiple giant tuna locate a massive aggregation of bait fish, they do not merely attack at random. They position themselves below the school, driving the panicked fish upward toward the illuminated surface. In the open ocean, the surface is a wall. It is the only boundary in a boundaryless world. By pushing the prey against the ceiling of the ocean, the tuna effectively compress the vertical space, compounding the exhaustion of the fish with spatial entrapment. The prey are crushed between the unyielding air above and the warm-blooded titans rising from below. The final tragedy of the bluefin tuna lies in the scale of its existence. It is an apex predator that commands the microseconds of a sardine's life, dictating the exact limits of stamina and muscle fatigue. Yet, it possesses absolutely no control over the vastness of its own domain. The overfishing that strips the oceans of its food sources, the warming waters that disrupt the efficiency of its carefully calibrated heat exchange system, the industrial nets that turn its need for perpetual motion against it, these are forces the tuna cannot outswim. The animal that decides when others fail cannot dictate the terms of its own survival. But down in the deep blue, stripped of human interference, the purity of its design remains unmatched. As the sardine's muscles finally lock with lactic acid, as its desperate escape arc flattens into a straight, exhausted line, the tuna senses the biological surrender. The ocean remains violently silent. There is no trickery. There is no ambush. There is only the harsh, undeniable mathematics of endurance. In a world without walls, without hiding places, without shadows, the only true boundary is the physiological limit of the living body. The bluefin tuna stands at that exact boundary, and with a final thrust of its crescent tail, it decides precisely when it will be crossed. A vibrant coral reef suddenly falls into an unnatural, hesitant silence. A predatory wrasse descends toward a sloping terrace of limestone, its eyes locked on a vulnerable crustacean scurrying across the rock. The wrasse angles its body for the final, lethal dart. But halfway through the descent, it abruptly flares its pectoral fins, arresting its own momentum. It banks hard to the left and abandons the hunt entirely. The prey did not outswim the predator. The predator was not frightened away by a larger hunter. The wrasse retreated because the seafloor itself has grown teeth. Across the substrate, a dense, blackened thicket has materialized. It is a living minefield of shadows and needles, thousands of rigid, venomous spears jutting outward in a mathematically perfect perimeter. This is not a creature that hunts. It does not pursue. It does not ambush. Yet, it dictates the movement of every living thing around it. This is a long-spined sea urchin, an organism that bypasses the evolutionary arms race of speed and stealth, choosing instead to conquer the ocean through absolute geometric denial. To understand the dominance of the sea urchin, you must discard the idea that power requires motion. The urchin is the ultimate architect of static control. It reorganizes three-dimensional space through sheer, unyielding density, converting open foraging grounds into impenetrable exclusion zones. At the center of this living fortress is a test, a rigid, near-spherical endoskeleton formed from tightly interlocking calcareous plates. This armored shell houses the vital organs, but it is what radiates outward from this core that commands the reef. Extending in every direction are the spines, slender, hollow, and astonishingly long, sometimes stretching over a foot from the central body. These are not passive spikes. Each spine is anchored to the test by a microscopic ball and socket joint, wrapped in muscle tissue that allows it to pivot, lean, and track disturbances in the water column. When a shadow passes overhead or a subtle pressure wave signals an approaching fish, the urchin does not flee. It bristles. The spines converge toward the threat, creating an overlapping phalanx deterrence. The threat of contact is severe. The surface of these spines is coated in a mild, agonizing venom, and their brittle structure is designed to snap off inside the flesh of an attacker, leaving a festering, toxic splinter buried deep within muscle tissue. A single urchin is a painful nuisance, but these creatures rarely exist in isolation. They form massive aggregations, carpeting the reef in a shifting, breathing forest of spikes. To a predator, a wall of hundreds of urchins is a non-negotiable boundary. The cost of navigating the thicket is simply too high. The urchins do not need to fight the predators. They merely make the physical act of feeding a mathematical impossibility. But the true, terrifying power of the long-spined sea urchin is not found in its defensive armor. It is found on its underside, hidden in the shadows where its body meets the rock. Here lies a complex, 5-part jaw apparatus known to biologists as Aristotle's lantern. It is a mechanical marvel of calcium carbonate teeth, continuously regenerating and powered by a network of relentless, grinding muscles. The urchin uses this lantern to scrape algae and bacterial biofilm directly off the coral substrate. In a healthy, balanced ecosystem, this scraping is the salvation of the reef. Corals are locked in perpetual, silent war for space against fast-growing marine algae. If the algae goes unchecked, it will smother the slow-growing coral polyps, starving them of sunlight and oxygen until the reef suffocates. The urchin acts as a grim, tireless gardener, shearing the algae down to the bare rock, maintaining the delicate equilibrium that allows the corals to thrive. However, when that equilibrium is broken, the urchin's relentless grazing transforms from salvation into biological devastation. The urchin is a symptom of trophic balance, tightly regulated by a specific caste of heavy-hitting predators. Triggerfish, large wrasses, and lobsters, animals possessing the armored jaws and sheer aggression required to crush an urchin's test. But when human overfishing strips these apex predators from the reef, the urchin population explodes. Without the triggerfish to keep them in check, the urchins march. A localized carpet becomes a localized plague. Their numbers surge into the millions, and their collective hunger outpaces the growth of the algae. Desperate for calories, Aristotle's lantern begins to scrape deeper. They strip the rock bare. They begin to consume the delicate, encrusting coralline algae that acts as the foundational cement of the reef. They erode the limestone matrix itself. In these moments of unchecked density, the urchins engineer what marine ecologists call an urchin barren. It is an underwater wasteland. The vibrant, multi-layered architecture of the coral reef, the branching sanctuaries, the deep crevices, the sprawling terraces, is systematically bulldozed into a flat, Featureless expanse of white rock, guarded only by a rolling black sea of spines. The biodiversity of the ecosystem plummets. Fish that depend on the coral structure for shelter are forced to abandon the territory. The urchins did not chase them away with speed or ferocity. They evicted them by slowly, methodically consuming the very architecture that sustained them. Yet, the irony of the urchin baron is that it exposes the ultimate paradox of this creature. It is an organism that simultaneously destroys habitat and becomes habitat. Even as an urchin swarm levels a reef, the microscopic spaces between their lethal spines create a mobile microenvironment. Tiny invertebrates, specialized shrimp, and juvenile cardinalfish will carefully weave themselves deep into the canopy of spines, using the urchin's terrifying perimeter as a shield against larger predators. To a moray eel or a grouper, the urchin is a fortress to be avoided. To a half-inch shrimp, that same urchin is a heavily armed sanctuary. The destroyer of the reef inadvertently carries a miniature, thriving ecosystem within its own weapon system. The sheer scale of their influence was violently demonstrated in the Caribbean during the early 1980s. A mysterious, waterborne pathogen swept through the ocean, targeting the long-spined sea urchin. Within a matter of months, 93 to 99% of the entire population suffered a catastrophic die-off. The immediate aftermath was not a renaissance of the reef. It was a total ecological collapse. Without the urchin's relentless grazing, the macroalgae exploded. Within a year, legendary coral reefs that stood for centuries were choked under thick, suffocating mats of fleshy algae. The ecosystem flipped from a coral-dominated paradise to an algal wasteland. The reef learned a brutal lesson. The only thing more destructive than an overabundance of urchins is their absolute absence. Control, in the world of the sea urchin, is a knife's edge. They are the silent regulators of the underwater world, holding the fate of entire coastlines in their grinding jaws. Their life cycle is a testament to the power of overwhelming numbers. During synchronized lunar-driven spawning events, a single reef of urchins will release millions of gametes into the water column. The resulting larvae drift in the pelagic currents, helpless, microscopic wanderers subject to the whims of the tide and the mouths of filter feeders. For an animal that relies entirely on an impenetrable defense, its beginnings are remarkably fragile. It trusts its lineage not to strength, but to the sheer, blinding probability of volume. The few that survive to settle on the limestone substrate will slowly grow their armor, transitioning from drifting prey to stationary monarchs of the rock. As the sun sets over the reef, the urchins begin their slow, creeping ascent from the deeper crevices. They move on hundreds of tiny, hydraulically powered tube feet, a creeping carpet of shadows reclaiming the night. They do not roar. They do not surge through the water with terrifying speed. They simply arrive, and in their arrival, the map of the ocean floor is redrawn. A foraging fish approaches the edge of the spine field, hovers for a moment, and turns back into the open water. The corridor is closed. The territory has been annexed. The long-spined sea urchin proves that dominance does not always belong to the swift, the massive, or the cunning. Sometimes, absolute control belongs to the entity that simply refuses to be touched, proving that if you gather enough needles in the dark, even the greatest predators in the ocean will learn to fear the stillness. The water does not explode. It stretches. It warps. Down on the illuminated boundary where the sunlit shallows meet the reef substrate, a small wrasse hovers just inches above the sand. Its pectoral fins flick with microscopic precision, keeping the fish perfectly stabilized in the gentle, sweeping current. It is alert. Its lateral line is tuned to the vibrations of approaching predators. Its eyes scan for the sudden, violent silhouettes of groupers or sharks. But the threat it is about to face does not cast a shadow. It does not displace water in a frantic rush. Instead, the ground itself begins to hallucinate, a ripple of electric contrast, dark turning to pale, pale snapping back to dark, begins to roll across a mound of what appear to be lifeless coral rubble. These strobing, hypnotic bands of black and white do not simply alter the color of the seabed. They fracture the geometry of the environment. The stripes cascade forward in a surgical, rhythmic succession, expanding and collapsing like a living barcode. The wrasse does not trigger its escape reflex. It does not bolt into the open blue. It stalls. It hovers there, its tiny brain locked in a catastrophic loop of sensory confusion. And in that infinite microscopic stall, the strike is launched. The architect of this paralyzing illusion is the common cuttlefish. In a marine world where dominance is typically established by the sheer, crushing pressure jaws, the brutal speed of a torpedo-shaped body, or the silent, toxic ambush of a venomous spine, the cuttlefish operates on an entirely different plane of warfare. It does not intervene in the physical world first. It intervenes in the cognitive world. It is the ocean's premier neurohacker. It does not chase its prey. It edits their perception. To understand this animal, you must look at its skin not as a biological barrier, but as the most sophisticated, high-definition display panel on the planet. The dermis of the cuttlefish is layered with millions of specialized cells. At the top lie the chromatophores, microscopic sacs of pigment, each tethered to a radial array of muscle fibers. Below them sit the iridophores, which act as structural reflectors, bouncing ambient light to create shimmering, iridescent greens and blues. At the base are the leucophores, capable of scattering light to produce a flawless, brilliant white. In most animals, color change is a slow, hormonally driven process, governed by the gradual ebb and flow of chemicals through the bloodstream. But the cuttlefish is wired differently. Its pigment cells are connected directly to its central nervous system. When the cuttlefish wants to change its appearance, it does not wait for a hormonal cascade. It simply fires a motor neuron. The muscle fibers contract instantly, pulling the pigment sacs wide open in a fraction of a millisecond. When the cuttlefish locks onto prey, it deploys a deeply unsettling behavior marine biologists refer to as a passing cloud. By firing coordinated, sequential neural signals across its mantle, the cuttlefish generates waves of high contrast, strobing patterns that ripple ceaselessly across its body. This display is not meant to camouflage the animal. It is meant to weaponize the visual processing center of the prey. The survival of the small reef fish like the wrasse hinges entirely on a rapid, stereotyped biological trigger known as the sea start escape reflex. When a looming threat approaches, specialized giant neurons, the Mothner cells, fire an electrical impulse that bypasses the brain's higher processing centers, traveling straight to the muscles. Within milliseconds, the fish's body contorts into a tight C shape and violently launches it away from the danger. This reflex is binary. It is designed to be triggered by sudden, massive changes in contrast and motion. The cuttlefish's strobing display brutally exploits this hardwired circuitry. The pulsating bands of dark and light mimic the optical illusion of forward motion. Yet the cuttlefish's body remains virtually stationary in the water. The wrasse's eyes take in a massive shifting contrast, but its lateral line feels no corresponding water displacement. The prey is hit with a wall of contradictory data. The substrate seems unstable. The visual field is shifting, yet nothing is physically approaching. The wrasse's neural resources, which should be instantly activating the Mothner cells for a desperate escape, are instead hijacked and diverted toward attempting to resolve this impossible motion. The reaction time of the wrasse elongates. It hesitates for a fraction of a second to recalculate. But in the mathematics of survival, that fraction of a second is absolute zero. By overwhelming the visual input with rhythmic patterning, the cuttlefish artificially delays the sensory confirmation the fish needs to flee. The predator does not overpower the muscle of the prey. It artificially raises the trigger threshold of its mind. In the precise moment the prey hesitates, the cuttlefish physically advances. The strike is a marvel of fluid mechanics and hydrostatic engineering. Hidden deep within specialized pockets beneath the cuttlefish's eyes are two elongated feeding tentacles. These are not the 8 standard arms used for crawling and manipulation. These are ballistic weapons, propelled by a sudden violent muscular contraction that instantly spikes the hydrostatic pressure within its body. The tentacles shoot forward. They accelerate faster than the wrasse's compromised nervous system can compensate. The tips of the tentacles are armed with heavily muscled, adhesive clubs that slap onto the flanks of the fish, locking shut with immediate, vacuum-sealed control. The wrasse is violently jerked backward, dragged into the writhing crown of the 8 shorter arms, and pulled directly toward a razor-sharp beak concealed at the center of the mantle. The fish never outswam the predator because it never received the internal command to flee until it was already being consumed. This mastery over the nervous system, however, extends far beyond the mechanics of the hunt. The cuttlefish wields its neural control over its skin as a form of high-stakes social leverage. During the intense competition of the mating season, male cuttlefish engage in visually explosive standoffs to secure access to females. But smaller males, unable to win in a test of pure physical intimidation, will resort to a breathtaking display of bilateral deception, positioning himself exactly between a receptive female and a larger, aggressive rival male. The smaller cuttlefish will literally split his biological display panel in half, down the exact center line of his body. He renders two entirely different realities. On the side facing the female, he pulses with the vivid, high-contrast, zebra-striped patterns of a strong, dominant, sexually mature male. Simultaneously, on the side facing the rival, he completely mutes his chromatophores, adopting the mottled, subdued camouflage patterns typical of an egg-laying female. The larger rival male looks over, sees what he calculates to be two females resting near the sand, and swims peacefully away, completely unaware that his optical hardware has been hacked. The smaller male successfully courts the female under cloak of a dual-rendered optical illusion. This requires a level of cognitive sophistication that is almost unfathomable for an invertebrate. It is anchored in a brain that, relative to its body size, rivals many vertebrates in its sheer complexity. The cuttlefish's optic lobes are massive, specialized supercomputers processing vast streams of visual data in real time. To execute this split-screen deception, the brain must independently analyze the orientation, distance, and angle of view of two separate targets, and simultaneously command millions of individual muscle fibers to hold a perfect edge between two conflicting lies. Yet, for all this astonishing neurological supremacy, the narrative of the cuttlefish is defined by a profound ecological reversal. The animal that wields the power to edit reality is entirely constructed of soft, highly vulnerable protein. It possesses no venom. It has no articulated armor. Its internal shell, the cuttlebone, is a porous structure designed for buoyancy regulation, offering zero protection against the crushing jaws of a dolphin, the tearing teeth of a seal, or the sheer power of a pelagic shark. To the rest of the ocean, the cuttlefish is not a mastermind. It is a highly nutritious, defenseless meal. This inherent fragility explains the evolution of its genius. The mesmerizing displays, the instantaneous camouflage, the cognitive hijacking. These are not the excesses of a flamboyant predator. They are the desperate risk mitigation tools of a deeply vulnerable animal. The cuttlefish must minimize its exposure time in the open water. It cannot afford a prolonged struggle with a wrasse, because the thrashing vibrations will attract larger hunters from the blue. Neural disruption evolved out of absolute necessity. The cuttlefish survives by ensuring that its encounters begin and end before the rest of the ocean even realizes a hunt has taken place. Even their hypnotic displays are meticulously calibrated to the environment. In the dark, low-visibility waters of the deep reef, the cuttlefish amplifies its contrast patterns, forcing the strobing effect to cut through the gloom. In bright, crystal-clear shallows, it softens the gradients, ensuring the illusion does not become too conspicuous to larger predators hovering above. There's a continuous, living feedback loop running between the ambient luminance of the ocean and the neural output of the cuttlefish's skin. It perfectly measures its own signal strength to maximize the cognitive overload in its prey without drawing a death sentence upon itself. But the final, most devastating reversal challenges our entire understanding of biological dominance. The cuttlefish exercises absolute mastery over the timing of its prey, but is utterly betrayed by its own temporal fragility. Despite its massive brain, its flawless camouflage, and its ability to hack the nervous systems of everything it touches, the common cuttlefish lives for little more than a year. Its brilliance is violently compressed into a fleeting, microscopic window of time. The animal invests every ounce of its metabolic energy into rapid growth in a single, frantic reproductive season. Once the eggs are laid and the sperm is passed, a biological kill switch is thrown. The cuttlefish enters a phase of rapid, catastrophic senescence. The muscles that once controlled millions of chromatophores with digital precision begin to slacken. The massive optic lobes begin to misfire. The skin loses its tension, flashing chaotic, uncontrolled colors as the nervous system collapses on itself. The creature that commanded the milliseconds of reaction time in others rapidly loses the ability to govern its own fading heartbeat. Within that brief, explosive year of life, however, it completely rewrites the rules of engagement. It does not rely purely on invisibility, though it can vanish into a bed of crushed coral with breathtaking, impossible fidelity. It does not depend solely on speed, though the ballistic launch of its tentacles ranks among the fastest biomechanical movements in the sea. Instead, it places its faith in the manipulation of cognition. It inserts confusion where certainty should exist. As the small wrasse drifts above the sand, its sensory world remains perfectly coherent, right up until the very first ripple of electric contrast arrives. The seabed flickers. The pattern intensifies into a rolling wave. Neural circuits refined by millions of years of evolution are instantly, hopelessly paralyzed. The delay is infinitesimal, but that delay is everything. The tentacles launch. The adhesive pads secure the flesh. The wrasse is ripped backward into the hidden beak. The cuttlefish releases no roar of victory. There is no cloud of blood, no dramatic spectacle for the ocean to witness. Its skin immediately settles back into the muted, mottled tones of surrounding rock. Its mantle resumes its gentle, rhythmic undulation. The ocean appears completely unchanged. Yet, in that silent, terrifying gap between stimulus and response, the cuttlefish sees control not of muscle, not water, but of time itself. By dictating the precise interval in which a decision can be made, the cuttlefish guarantees the outcome. Reaction is twisted into hesitation. Hesitation becomes capture, and the frantic rhythm of survival bends perfectly to the luminous, strobing choreography of total neural disruption. The water fractures before the seal understands it has already been selected. Resting on the brittle edge of an Antarctic ice floe, the animal believes it has found sanctuary. It breathes the freezing air, its dark eyes scanning the horizon. But below the surface, the ocean has ceased to be merely water. It has become a grid, and the seal is standing on the only remaining variable. A dark, massive shape rolls silently beneath the ice, not striking, not accelerating, simply existing in a position that casually closes the primary escape corridor. A second shadow materializes to the left, sealing another route. Then, a third drifts into place behind. The seal's heart rate spikes wildly. Lactate begins to flood its muscle tissue as its nervous system readies for an explosive, anaerobic sprint. But there is nowhere to sprint. The ocean around it has already shifted from a chaotic habitat into a flawlessly engineered architecture of containment. The hunters below are not converging in a frenzy. They are arranging. The decision of who lives and who dies has already been made, calculated and confirmed long before the first burst of kinetic speed. The architects of this terrifying inevitability are the orca. To call them killer whales is to misunderstand them entirely. The name implies a singular, mindless ferocity, a brute force predator driven by bloodlust. The reality is far more profound and infinitely more dangerous. The orca is an apex intelligence. Its dominance does not rely on raw pursuit or the sheer crushing power of its jaws, though it possesses both in devastating abundance, capable of tearing through the ocean at over 30 knots. But speed is rarely the decisive variable. Instead, the orca governs the sea through the coordinated manipulation of space, driven by an almost telepathic social cohesion. This is not a solitary hunter. The pod operates as a highly sophisticated, distributed decision-making network. Beneath the waves, the water column is alive with their vocalizations, complex clicks, whistles, and pulse calls that carry vast amount of tactical information across miles of ocean. These dialects are not hardwired genetic reflexes. They are specific to familial groups known as matrilines. They are languages. The hunting strategies they discuss in the dark are culturally transmitted, taught by the matriarchs of the calves, refined over generations, and inherited socially. An orca does not simply know how to hunt by instinct. It must be educated. When a pod targets a marine mammal taking refuge on an ice floe, they do not attempt to drag it off by force. They deploy a masterpiece of hydrodynamic engineering. Several massive orcas pull back from the ice, aligning themselves side by side in perfect military formation. Communicating through rapid clicks, they accelerate forward in absolute synchrony. Just before they reach the ice, they dive, driving their massive flukes downward. This synchronized displacement of water generates a massive, rolling wave. The wave crests, slamming over the surface of the floe, shattering the ice, and washing the seal violently into the freezing sea. The orcas did not chase the seal into the water. They physically removed the foundation from beneath it. The energy expenditure required to generate the wave is shared efficiently across the pod, reducing the metabolic cost per hunter to almost nothing, while the prey's only refuge is transformed into the exact instrument of its downfall. Control here is a manipulation of the physical environment on a massive, structural scale. Yet, the most chilling aspect of orca dominance is not their ability to engineer waves, but their mastery of isolation. When a pod sets its sights on the great baleen whale migrations, they do not launch a frontal assault against a massive, defensive adult. They look for the vulnerability of the bond. They target the calf. The hunt is an agonizing display of strategic partitioning. The pod divides into highly specialized subgroups. The largest, most aggressive males will flank the mother, harassing her, biting at her flukes, constantly maneuvering to block her path and divert her attention. They are not trying to kill her. They are managing her fury. Meanwhile, the rest of the pod systematically wedges itself between the mother and the calf. They use their bodies as physical barriers, swimming over the calf's blowhole to deny it oxygen, slowly, methodically pushing it away. This is not random aggression. It is the calculated exploitation of the maternal instinct. By forcing the mother to constantly pivot and defend against phantom strikes, the orcas create microscopic spatial gaps. They widen those gaps until the physical distance becomes lethal. The calf's fate is sealed not merely by the superior strength of the predators, but by the deliberate, surgical disruption of social cohesion. The orcas weaponize love, turning the protective bond of the whales into the very wedge used to pry them apart. The biological hardware required to execute this level of warfare is staggering. Orcas possess some of the largest brains among all marine mammals. Their cerebral cortex is heavily folded, providing massive surface area for extreme cognitive processing. More importantly, their limbic system, the region of the brain associated with emotional processing, empathy, and social bonding, is incredibly developed, possessing an entire extra lobe that humans lack. This neurological architecture supports a cooperative dynamic, so intense it defies human comparison. They do not merely hunt together. They anticipate the exact future movements of their partners. This predictive modeling allows a pod to choreograph a complex, high-speed encirclement without ever colliding. They can dynamically adjust their speed, angle, and depth the moment a prey attempts a novel escape vector. Before a hunt even transitions to visual contact, the orcas have already mapped the battlefield using echolocation. By emitting focused streams of clicks and analyzing the returning echoes, they construct high-definition acoustic images of the water column. This sonar does not just locate a school of fish or seal. It assesses the density of the target, its precise trajectory, its skeletal structure, and its internal organ density. The pod can acoustically determine which Pacific fish in a massive school is carrying an injury, or which seal resting on a jagged ice edge is positioned closest to fracture. Decision-making is executed in the dark, based on data invisible to the eye. They hold absolute formational superiority before the prey even realizes it is being perceived. When they turn their acoustic weaponry onto schooling fish, they do not shatter the shoal through chaotic lunges. They compress it, swimming along the perimeter. They release rapid bursts of bubbles. To the fish, these bubbles are terrifying visual and acoustic barriers, exploiting their innate avoidance of sudden contrast. The fish tighten their formation, seeking safety in numbers, falling victim to confusion effect. The orcas herd them into a dense, suffocating bait ball. But unlike the frenzied strikes of lesser predators, the orcas exhibit chilling restraint. They turn their backs to the school and violently slap their massive tail flukes into the center of the ball. The concussive underwater shockwave instantly stuns dozens of fish, immobilizing them. The orcas then casually turn back around and gently pick the paralyzed fish from the water column one by one. They do not expend energy chasing. They dictate the tempo of the encounter, accelerating only when necessary, pausing to feed, completely in control of the rhythm of death. However, the narrative of the invincible ocean god contains a profound and devastating ecological reversal. The orca's greatest weapon, its brilliant, culturally transmitted social intelligence, it is also the source of its ultimate fragility. Because their hunting strategies are learned rather than hardwired, their survival depends entirely on the stability of the matrilineal pod. They are reliant on the elders, the matriarchs who hold the generational memory of where to find food when the salmon runs fail, how to navigate changing ice flows, and how to execute the complex choreography of a wave wash or a whale hunt. When human interference fractures this delicate social structure, when industrial ship noise deafens their echolocation and drowns out their dialects, or when overfishing triggers localized starvation, the transmission of knowledge breaks down. If a matriarch dies prematurely, the library burns. Without the elders to guide them, younger individuals may struggle to master the complex tactical geometries required to survive. An orca cannot simply fall back on blind instinct to orchestrate a synchronized wave. The pod's greatest strength, its cultural continuity, becomes a catastrophic weakness under environmental stress. The master of the ocean is bound by the fragility of memory. Furthermore, their ecological dominance is not defined by winning every single encounter. It is defined by their terrifying adaptability. Humpback whales have been documented charging across miles of open ocean to actively interfere in orca hunts, placing their massive bodies between the pod and a targeted seal or calf. Faced with a 40-ton armored leviathan swinging lethal, barnacle-encrusted pectoral fins, the orcas do not fight a losing war of attrition. They calculate the caloric risk, abort the mission, and seamlessly switch to an entirely different prey class. This flexibility shapes the structure of the entire planet. In regions where orca pods have shifted their diet from declining whale populations to coastal sea otters, the ecological shockwaves have redrawn the map. Sea otters are the primary regulators of sea urchins. When the orcas remove the otters, the urchin populations explode unchecked, aggressively overgrazing the towering kelp forests until the habitat completely collapses into an urchin barren. A single dietary decision made by a pod of orcas reverberates down to the trophic levels, destroying fish nursery habitats, altering coastal erosion patterns, and dramatically reducing the ocean's ability to sequester carbon. The decisions made by this predator operate on a planetary scale. Yet, as the hunt concludes, the truth of their existence comes into sharp focus. The term killer whale evokes a lone, bloodthirsty rogue, but true dominance in the ocean is profoundly communal. No single orca controls the vastness of the sea alone. Authority does not reside in the teeth of the individual. It emerges in the breathtaking synchronization of the collective. The pod functions as a single, massive, adaptive organism, with each member acting as a sensory node, a muscle fiber, and a vault of learned behavior. The seal that sensed the danger too late was not defeated by raw speed. It was defeated by peerless coordination. The calf separated from its mother in the deep blue was not simply overpowered. It was strategically isolated by a mind that understood the mechanics of maternal grief. The orcas do not dominate through sudden impulse or chaotic violence. They dominate through grand, structural design. They dictate the variables of the encounter long before the first surge of acceleration, silently shaping currents, herding migrations, and closing corridors, until the chaotic struggle for survival is reduced to nothing more than a chilling, flawless inevitability. The ocean operates on a fundamental geometry of trust. In the sunlit layers above the reef, millions of silverfish move as a single, liquid entity. They are bound together by an invisible architecture of shared instinct, a synchronized ballet honed over epochs of evolution. This is a dilution effect, the mathematical certainty that within a dense, swirling mass, the probability of any one specific individual being targeted by a predator drops to near zero. Their safety is entirely dependent on their cohesion. They are a fortress of flashing scales, perfectly attuned to the microscopic shifts in water pressure generated by their neighbors. But on the periphery of this perfect unity, hovering just outside the limits of their peripheral vision, is a predator that does not intend to breach the fortress. It intends to make the fortress tear itself apart. The water fractures before the teeth even make contact. A single, razor-thin silhouette knifes through the blue, and the synchronized mass of school instantly detonates. Silver bodies explode outward in 1,000 random directions, their lateral lines screaming with contradictory data, their muscles firing in blind, anaerobic arcs. The prey do exactly what their DNA has commanded them to do for millions of years. They scatter, but in that desperate, hardwired attempt to save themselves, they commit the ultimate fatal error. In scattering, they surrender the only true protection they ever had. Isolation is a death sentence. The orchestrator of the psychological and physical rupture is a great barracuda. To understand the terror of this animal, you must discard the concept of the relentless, enduring pursuit. The barracuda is not a marathon runner like the tuna, designed to slowly grind its prey into metabolic failure. The barracuda is an assassin built for explosive, absolute violence. It is a pelagic torpedo of compressed muscle and rigid bone, engineered by evolution for one highly specific task: violent, unadulterated acceleration. Its body is an uncompromising spear. It is elongated, stiff, and utterly devoid of the drag-inducing curves found in other reef predators. Its muscular architecture is packed with dense, fast-twitch fibers, capable of unleashing a catastrophic burst of kinetic energy in a fraction of a second. The barracuda does not need to corner its prey against a coral wall, nor does it need to lure them into the dark confines of a cave. It does not herd them. It weaponizes their own innate panic response, turning their evolutionary programming into the exact mechanism of their demise. The psychological warfare begins long before the physical strike. Rooted in a masterpiece of optical deception, the barracuda positions itself perfectly still at the very edge of the school's visual threshold. It does not try to blend into the coral rubble or the sand. Instead, it becomes a mirror. Its flanks are covered in highly reflective, elongated scales that capture the ambient light of the tropical waters. But these scales are not merely passive camouflage. They are active optical disruptors. As the barracuda holds perfectly motionless, the reflective surfaces fragment the light across its rigid body. To the schooling fish, this creates a catastrophic failure of depth perception. The predator appears simultaneously incredibly distant and terrifyingly close. It does not register as a solid, defined threat, but rather as a shimmering glitch in the water column, a distortion that the prey's visual cortex struggles to resolve. Furthermore, in the bright, dappled sunlight of the shallow reef, a subtle twitch of the barracuda's body sends a sudden, brilliant glint of light flashing across the water. To a panicked prey fish, this sudden strobe mimics the flashing scales of other fleeing fish. It creates phantom movement, a visual chaos that leaves the school deeply disoriented, unable to lock on the true origin of the danger. When the barracuda finally decides to close the distance, it initiates an attack that defies the processing speed of the reef. Driven by a massive, sweeping stroke of its deeply forked caudal fin, it crosses the void with a velocity that most prey species simply cannot neurologically compute. But the sheer brilliance of the barracuda strategy is that this initial, blinding strike is not actually aimed at a specific fish. It is aimed at the concept of the school itself. The goal of the primary strike is pure, unadulterated disruption. As the rigid, torpedo-shaped body slices through the center of the mass, it pushes a massive, invisible shockwave of water pressure ahead of it. The lateral line systems of the schooling fish, the incredibly sensitive sensory organs that allow them to feel precise movements of their neighbors, are instantaneously overwhelmed by this acoustic and hydrostatic roar. The delicate sensory network that binds the school together is shattered. Deprived of their collective sensory input, the individual fish are plunged into sensory darkness. Panic takes over. They initiate emergency escape responses in completely random, uncoordinated vectors, prioritizing nothing but immediate, desperate separation from the perceived epicenter of the threat. The beautiful, synchronized geometry of the school instantly collapses into biological shrapnel. And in the center of that manufactured chaos, the barracuda recalibrates. This is where the great barracuda transitions from an engine of chaos into a surgeon of death. Unlike predators that rely on extended pursuit to run down a fleeing target, the barracuda executes a terrifyingly precise second phase, targeted interception. As the school explodes outward, the barracuda's massive, hyper-adapted eyes, positioned to provide acute, forward-facing binocular vision, rapidly scan the expanding cloud of silver. Its highly evolved nervous system is tuned for extreme rapid processing. Neural conduction pathways fire at blistering speeds, allowing the predator's brain to track dozens of erratic, moving targets in a matter of milliseconds. It ignores the bulk of the fleeing mass. Instead, it looks for the anomaly. It searches for the single fish that turns slightly too late, the one that hesitated for a fraction of a second, the one that broke too far from the safety of the collective. It searches for the isolated body. Once a fish is separated from the dilution effect of the school, its mathematical probability of survival plummets to zero. The barracuda locks onto its isolated victim and fires its fast-twitch muscles a second time. The jaws open, revealing an anatomical nightmare. The barracuda does not possess the flat, crushing plates of a bottom feeder, nor the conical, gripping teeth of a crocodilian. Its mouth is lined with rows of unequal, dagger-like teeth that are laterally compressed, flattened on the sides to form razor-sharp cutting edges. These teeth are not designed to hold a struggling prey. They are designed to slice through muscle, tendon, and bone with zero resistance. As it overtakes the isolated fish, the barracuda delivers a devastating, slashing bite. In a single violent snap, inflicts deep, catastrophic lacerations that instantly sever vital structures. The prey is paralyzed not by venom, but by the instantaneous destruction of its own anatomy. This method is incredibly energy efficient. The predator does not have to wrestle a thrashing victim. It simply delivers a mortal wound and allows the prey's biology to rapidly fail, conserving its own energy for the next explosive burst. Yet, embedded deep within this terrifying display of dominance is a profound ecological paradox. The absolute supremacy of the great barracuda is entirely dependent upon the very behavioral flaw it exploits. If a school of fish were to somehow overcome millions of years of instinct, if they maintained their tight, cohesive formation even as the predator sliced through them, the barracuda's success rate would plummet. The predator thrives exclusively on the manufacture of panic. But panic is not a universal constant. In certain species, intense predation pressure has forged a tighter, unyielding schooling reflex, forcing the barracuda to constantly adapt its angles and speeds. Its control over the chaos requires the prey to react predictably. The moment the prey defies its own fear, the barracuda's strategy shatters. Furthermore, the barracuda is plagued by its own profound physical vulnerabilities. It is the ultimate glass cannon of the reef. Its slender, elongated body, the very trait that grants it such peerless acceleration, offers absolutely no armor protection. It lacks the venomous spines of a lionfish, the toxic flesh of a puffer, or the thick, muscular bulk of a grouper. To a large reef shark, a barracuda caught unaware is simply a slow-turning, unprotected meal. A miscalculated strike, a burst of speed that carries it too far into open water, or a moment of lingering distraction can easily place the barracuda within the crushing jaws of a superior, heavier hunter. Because of this inherent fragility, the barracuda cannot roam the open pelagic voids with the reckless abandon of a tuna. It is tethered to the architecture of the reef. It patrols the edges of drop-offs, the shadows of shipwrecks, and the complex coral structures that provide immediate, necessary avenues for retreat. It rules the open water, but it must keep its back to the wall. This vulnerability is most glaringly obvious in the earliest stages of its life. The narrative reversal of the barracuda begins in its youth. Juvenile barracudas, miniature replicas of the adult assassins, do not roam the mangroves and shallow seagrass beds as solitary hunters. They form loose, nervous aggregations. They school. In the fragile beginnings of their existence, they are forced to rely on the exact same dilution effect, the exact same synchrony, and the exact same cohesion strategies as a prey they will one day slaughter. Panic is something the juveniles must desperately avoid, not create. Only as they age, as their fast twitch muscles thicken, their jaws lengthen, and their neural processing speeds cross a critical threshold, do they abandon the safety of the group. They transition, slowly and inevitably, from participants in unity into solitary engineers of chaos. The predator that dismantles the school is born from the school. The impact of the adult barracuda's hunting strategy reverberates far beyond the immediate spray of scales and blood. By repeatedly triggering these massive scattering events within specific zones of the reef, the barracuda actively terraforms the spatial ecology of the entire ecosystem. Fish possess memory. They learn the geography of risk. If a certain coral channel or a specific drop-off becomes known as a high-speed ambush zone, herbivorous fish will alter their grazing patterns to avoid it. They will abandon rich patches of algae, rather than risk the open water. The phantom threat of the barracuda, the mere possibility of sudden, violent disruption, alters how thousands of other organisms distribute themselves across the seascape. The predator influences the behavior of the reef even when it is miles away. The geometry of fear outlasts the physical presence of the hunter. As the scattered remnants of school frantically attempt to reform, the water remains charged with tension. The barracuda does not immediately pursue the regrouped mass. It circles slowly on the periphery, a shimmering ghost in the water column. It is a master at timing. It waits for the inevitable weakness. Another rupture in the formation, another fish caught mid-turn, another mind clouded by lingering panic. The water gradually settles. The pressure waves dissipate. But the fundamental trust within the school has been irreversibly broken. Individuals that fled too far rejoin the mass with hesitant, jerky movements. The collective memory of a sudden, invisible explosion dictates their every twitch. The great barracuda's brand of control is intimately tied to the psychology of disaster. It does not slowly squeeze the life from its prey, nor does it herd them into inescapable physical corners. It detonates order. It finds the invisible architectural weak point of a group's defensive psychology and shatters it with absolute kinetic violence, capitalizing on the fragmented, terrified pieces left behind. The ultimate tragedy of the encounter lies in the cold, unfeeling irony of evolution. The schooling instinct to scatter at the first sign of massive displacement has preserved countless generations of fish against slower, clumsier predators. It is an instinct that should guarantee survival. Yet, in the presence of this rigid, silver torpedo, that exact instinct is weaponized against them. Scattering does not lead to safety. Scattering becomes the very definition of surrender. The great barracuda does not need to outmaneuver 1,000 fish. It simply controls the precise, catastrophic moment they lose their coordination. And in that terrifying fraction of a second, when unity dissolves into madness, the barracuda does not just hunt, it reigns. The encounter does not begin with a chase. There is no desperate sprint across the reef, no sudden shadow blotting out the sun, and no violent displacement of water to warn of an approaching threat. A juvenile fish, navigating the intricate, submerged root system of a coastal mangrove, flicks its tail and glides into a stretch of water that appears absolutely empty. But in less than a fraction of a heartbeat, the animal's forward momentum is violently arrested. Its muscles seize, locking instantly as if a massive electrical current has been driven directly into its spine. The ocean has not changed color. The water remains perfectly clear. Yet, the fish is completely paralyzed, its nervous system hijacked and shut down before it could even complete a single panic stroke of its tail. The fish did not outswim a predator, because there was no predator to outswim. It simply swam into an invisible minefield. Suspended within that lethal transparency, drifting with a terrifying, calculated silence, is the box jellyfish. To understand this creature is to abandon everything you know about how predators operate. The box jellyfish does not rely on the crushing bite force of a shark, the blinding acceleration of tuna, or the muscular restraint of an octopus. It does not overpower its victims. It governs the ocean by taking the very medium of life, the open water itself, and transforming it into an invisible, heavily armed perimeter. Its dominance is not about pursuit. It is about absolute, uncompromising spatial control. Unlike the vast majority of gelatinous zooplankton that surrender entirely to the whims of the tide, drifting blindly wherever the current dictates, the box jellyfish is an active navigator. It's translucent, cube-shaped bell pulses with rhythmic measured contraction, propelling the animal forward with a degree of directional intent that is deeply unsettling for an organism without a centralized brain. It does not just float, it steers. Embedded at the four corners of its bell are highly complex sensory clusters known as ropalia. These are not primitive light-sensing patches. They are sophisticated visual organs. Each ropalium contains multiple eyes, complete with lenses, corneas, and retinas, capable of detecting gradient of light, recognizing shapes, and mapping vertical structures. The box jellyfish uses this visual data to actively orient itself. It purposely navigates toward the shadowed, nutrient-dense waters of mangrove shorelines and muddy estuaries, the exact environments where vulnerable juvenile fish congregate. It seeks out the nursery, and it brings death with it. From the corners of its bell trail, the true instruments of its dominion, the tentacles. Stretching out for up to 10 feet in length, these filaments are virtually invisible underwater. They hang like ghost threads in the current, and they are armed with one of the most sophisticated, devastating weapon systems in the natural world. Lining every inch of these tentacles are millions of microscopic, specialized cells called cnidocytes. Within each of these cells lies a coiled, pressurized capsule known as a nematocyst. Think of it as a microscopic, biological harpoon loaded and waiting on a hair trigger. These cells are activated not by a conscious decision from the jellyfish, but by mechanical and chemical stimuli. The moment the microscopic surface of a fish's scale brushes against a tentacle, the chemical signature of the prey triggers the trap. What happens next is widely considered to be one of the fastest cellular processes in the entire animal kingdom. Driven by a massive instantaneous buildup of osmotic pressure within the cell, the harpoon everts and fires outward, accelerating at a staggering 5 million G-forces. It penetrates the skin of the prey and injects its toxic payload in less than a millionth of a second. The fish swimming through the mangrove roots does not just brush against a single harpoon, it brushes against thousands of them simultaneously. It triggers a microscopic, biochemical firing squad. The payload delivered by these nematocysts is a nightmare of evolutionary chemistry. It is a highly complex cocktail of toxins designed for absolute, immediate incapacitation. The venom contains pore-forming proteins that literally punch holes through the cellular membranes of the victim's tissue, causing the cells to leak and die instantly. It contains potent cardiotoxins that directly attack the heart muscle, but the most immediate effect is the disruption of the ion channels within the victim's nervous system. The electrical signaling between the brain and the muscles is violently severed. The fish does not thrash. It does not struggle. It simply stops. The box jellyfish then slowly, methodically retracts a tentacle, drawing the paralyzed, but often still living, prey upward toward the bell. The oral arms reach down, transferring the tissue into the mouth. The control was established the very second the perimeter was breached. What appears to be a passive, drifting encounter is, in reality, the execution of a flawless ambush based on mathematics of probability and the chemistry of death. By deploying these invisible curtains of venom, the box jellyfish essentially annexes three-dimensional space. In the shallow coastal habitats where it hunts, small fish rely on the tangled architecture of mangrove roots for shelter, darting out into the open corridors to feed before retreating. The jellyfish occupies those exact corridors. It places itself directly in the pathway between sanctuary and sustenance. It does not need to herd the fish or chase them down. It simply strings its lethal tripwires across the door and waits. Yet, for an organism capable of such terrifying lethality, the box jellyfish is defined by a profound, almost absurd fragility. This is the ecological reversal that prevents it from completely conquering the seas. The predator that can shut down the nervous system of a vertebrate in a fraction of a second is comprised of 95% water. It possesses no bones, no scales, no armor, and no sharp defensive spines. Its gelatinous body is incredibly susceptible to the turbulence of the ocean. A heavy storm or a violently shifting current can tear its delicate tissues to shreds. Furthermore, its venom, while devastating to fish and humans, is completely useless against certain specialized predators. The sea turtle, armored by thick, keratinized scales and guided by an evolutionary immunity to the toxins, views the box jellyfish not as a terrifying apex predator, but as a slow-moving gelatinous meal. A sea turtle will gladly swim straight through the invisible minefield, closing its eyes as it rips the bell apart, completely unfazed by the millions of harpoons firing uselessly into its thick tissues. The master of the coastal waters is utterly defenseless against a reptile that refuses to be poisoned. The vulnerability of the box jellyfish extends deep into its own life cycle. It does not begin its life as a drifting assassin. After a synchronized sexual reproduction event, the jellyfish releases microscopic larvae into the water column. These larvae do not possess the venomous tentacles of the adults. Instead, they sink to the bottom and permanently attach themselves to hard substrates, rocks, submerged shells, or the undersides of mangrove roots. Here, they transform into tiny, flower-like polyps. In this benthic stage, they are entirely stationary, resembling miniature sea anemones, filtering tiny particles from the water to survive. They will remain in this helpless, stationary state for months, waiting for precise environmental cues, a subtle shift in water temperature, a specific change in salinity brought on by seasonal rains, to trigger their metamorphosis. Only when environmental conditions promise an abundance of juvenile fish will the polyps rapidly transform, budding off into free-swimming medusae that will grow into the venomous adults. Their reign of terror is not permanent. It is highly cyclical, tightly bound to the seasonal rhythms of the planet's climate. When conditions are perfect, when nutrient runoffs cause plankton blooms and fish populations surge, the box jellyfish populations explode. They swarm the coastlines, turning vast stretches of shallow water into absolute no-go zones. Fish species that survive these encounters rapidly develop intense avoidance behaviors. The mere presence of the jellyfish redirects entire migrations of juvenile fish, forcing them to abandon traditional, nutrient-rich nurseries for safer, less productive waters. This mass redirection of prey species sends shockwaves up the entire food web, starving larger predators that rely on those nurseries. An animal with no brain, no bones, and no teeth effectively dictates the geographical distribution of an entire coastal ecosystem. But when the season shifts or when the waters cool, their numbers collapse just as quickly as they rose. They dissolve back into the ecosystem, leaving the corridors open once again. For the humans who venture into these tropical waters, the box jellyfish represents a primal, unparalleled terror. We are terrestrial creatures, used to seeing the things that can kill us. A shark presents a dorsal fin. A lion presents a roar. A snake presents a rattle. The box jellyfish presents nothing. It does not announce its presence. It does not aggressively pursue the swimmer. It simply hangs in the water column, entirely indifferent to what crosses its path. The human intruder initiates the contact, swimming blindly into the venomous threads. The resulting agony is instantaneous, and the cardiotoxins can induce heart failure before the swimmer can even reach the shore. As the late afternoon sun filters down to the canopy of the mangrove forest, casting long, fractured shadows into the brackish water, the ecosystem seems at peace. Small fish dart nervously from the roots, seeking food in the open channels. But hanging silently in the shadows, almost entirely invisible against the dappled light, are the trailing threads of the ghost. A single, careless movement, a microscopic brush against the transparent filament, the harpoon's fire. The venom floods the nervous system. The fish freezes mid-swim, its life extinguished in the silent gap between heartbeats. The box jellyfish does not dominate through a terrifying spectacle of violence. It governs through the terrifying realization that in the ocean, the most dangerous boundaries are the ones you cannot see until it is already too late. The ocean floor is a landscape of deception, but there is an unspoken rule among the inhabitants of the coral reef. The rock is neutral territory. A small damselfish, its nervous system frayed from dodging the high-speed strikes of pelagic hunters, descends to a scattered patch of limestone rubble. It lowers its fins. It slows its breathing. It crosses the psychological boundary between the dangerous open water and the safety of a seabed. There is no shadow to trigger its lateral line. There is no sudden displacement of water. But as the fish drifts just inches above a crust of algae-stained coral, the rock beneath it exhales. A mouth, wider than the fish's entire body, rips open from the solid substrate. The water violently implodes downward, and in a single, catastrophic inhalation, the damselfish vanishes into the earth. The seabed did not hide a predator. The seabed was a predator. Buried within the architecture of the rubble, completely indistinguishable from the dead coral surrounding it, lies the reef stonefish. In an ecosystem where survival usually dictates that you must either outswim your enemies or outsmart them with complex social geometries, the stonefish opts for a terrifying third path. It does not chase its prey. It does not defend its territory with aggressive displays. It completely erases a distinction between its own biological body and the geological landscape. Control, for the stonefish, is not imposed through intimidation or velocity. It is imposed through perfect, uncompromising assimilation. To comprehend the stonefish is to look at a masterclass in morphological surrender. Its body is an anatomical rejection of everything that makes a fish look like a fish. The sleek, hydrodynamic curves required for swimming have been discarded. In their place is a grotesque, asymmetrical mass texture with warty protrusions deep pitting in irregular ridges. Its skin perfectly mirrors the encrusting sponges, the calcified coral and algae, and the decaying rubble of the reef floor. The pigmentation is not a static color. It is a mottled tapestry of dead browns, muted grays, and toxic greens that shift to perfectly match the specific microhabitat it has chosen to occupy. It takes camouflage to its absolute logical extreme. It does not just look like a rock. It allows the reef to treat it like one. Over time, actual algae and tiny marine organisms will begin to colonize the skin of the stonefish, weaving the animal directly into the living fabric of the substrate. Once it settles into a crevice or buries itself partially in the coarse sand, it shuts down almost all physical movement. It will not twitch. It will not adjust. Only its upward-facing eyes, buried in deep, fleshy pits, betray any sign of animation, scanning the water column through a thin, microscopic film of water. Even its respiration is weaponized through subtlety. It achieves oxygen exchange through a gentle, almost imperceptible pumping of its gills that is carefully calibrated not to disturb a single grain of surrounding sand. The reef does not register its breathing. The reef registers it as inanimate stone. The mechanism of its control is entirely spatial. On a bustling coral reef, small fish and invertebrates use the rubble zones as corridors of transit, safe highways that connect the branching sanctuaries of coral heads. They rely on these stretches of dead stone to shield them from the circling sharks and the plunging barracudas. But when a stonefish installs itself within that corridor, it fundamentally alters the architecture of risk. It converts sanctuary into a biological trap. It does not force its prey to make a mistake. It redefines what constitutes a safe zone. The strike, when it finally comes, is a triumph of biomechanical engineering. The stonefish relies on buccal suction feeding, a method common among ambush predators, but perfected here to a horrifying degree. Because the prey believes it is hovering over neutral, dead ground, its escape thresholds are completely lowered. The damselfish is not primed to flee. When the stonefish triggers its attack, its massive jaws hinge outward, and its buccal cavity expands at lightning speed, creating an instantaneous, massive negative pressure zone. The surrounding water and everything suspended within it is sucked violently inward. The fish is swallowed whole before its Mothner cells can even register the visual cue to initiate an escape reflex. The fish is betrayed by its own misplaced confidence in the terrain. Yet, the true infamy of the reef stonefish does not come from how it eats, but from how it defends its stolen territory. Lying along its dorsal ridge are 13 stout, rigid spines, each one resembling a jagged shard of broken coral. But these spines are hollow, and they are connected at the base to heavily modified venom glands. This is the most potent, excruciatingly painful venom of any fish on the planet. The stonefish does not use this venom offensively. It does not inject its prey to paralyze them. The venom is purely defensive architecture. It is designed to transform the stonefish from a hidden predator into a permanent, unmovable fixture of the reef. If a larger predator, a reef shark or a massive grouper, attempt to bite down on what it thinks is a concealed fish, or if a wading mammal steps on the spine, the physical pressure on the spine compresses a gland. The venom is mechanically forced up through the hollow groove and injected deep into the tissue of the attacker. The biological payload is a devastating mixture of myotoxins and cardiotoxins. It induces immediate mind-shattering pain, severe tissue necrosis, and in many cases, total cardiovascular collapse. The defense is so overwhelming that any predator lucky enough to survive the initial envenomation will never, under any circumstances, attempt to disturb that patch of rubble again. Because of this ultimate deterrent, the stonefish is granted a permanent, uncontested throne. It can remain in the exact same location for weeks or even months without ever being forced to retreat or relocate. It owns the ground simply by refusing to be moved. But as with all extreme evolutionary specializations, this absolute dominance carries a devastating ecological tax. The narrative reverse of the stonefish is found in the very design that makes it invincible. The immobility that serves as its greatest weapon is also its ultimate vulnerability. If a severe storm surge tears a reef apart, or if shifting currents force the stonefish to abandon its carefully chosen microhabitat, the illusion is instantly broken. When it is forced to swim, the stonefish is a tragic, clumsy creature. Its heavy, bulbous body is entirely unsuited for propulsion. It cannot glide. It cannot dart. It lumbers through the water column. Its mottled camouflage now completely useless against the stark blue backdrop of the open ocean. In these rare moments of transit, the invincible master of the seabed is exposed as a terrible swimmer, highly vulnerable to the crushing jaws of the very apex predators it normally deters. This vulnerability is magnified exponentially during its reproductive cycle. To ensure the continuation of its lineage, the stonefish cannot hide its offspring in the safety of the rubble. During spawning events, it is forced to release massive clouds of buoyant eggs directly into the open water column. These eggs drift helplessly in pelagic currents, entirely exposed to the billions of filter feeders and small predators that patrol the upper layers of the ocean. The ultimate master of grounded territory cannot extend its armor or its venom to its own future generations. The adults command the stone, but they must surrender their young to the mercy of the void. It is only after running the horrific gauntlet of the open ocean that the surviving microscopic larvae will eventually sink back down to the seafloor. They will settle onto the limestone, and over time, their bodies will slowly warp and calcify. They will acquire the warty textures, the muted pigments, and the crushing stillness of their ancestors. The line between the living organism and the dead rock will slowly blur until it vanishes completely. As the shadow of a passing shark glides over the reef, a dozen small fish dive toward the seabed, seeking refuge in a cluster of broken coral. They tuck themselves into crevices, their gills pumping rapidly, completely unaware that the rock they are pressing their bodies against is breathing with them. The stonefish does not react to the shark above, nor does it immediately strike at the fish resting against its jaw. It has the patience of geology. In an ocean where survival is typically a frantic, high-speed arms race of muscle and agility, the reef stonefish governs through the ultimate act of subtraction. It dominates the environment by completely erasing its own presence from it. The coral reef promises safety and shelter to those fleeing the chaos of the open water. But the stonefish is a terrifying reminder that safe zones are nothing more than optical illusions drawn in sand and rubble. It waits in absolute silence, a living landmine buried in the architecture of the ocean, proving that the most inescapable traps are the ones you willingly choose to hide inside. A shadow drifts across the sun-baked mud, a shallow Indonesian estuary. The water here is turbid, thick with suspended sediment, a chaotic twilight where visibility is measured in inches. A predatory snapper glides low to the substrate, its eyes scanning the barren sand for the subtle tremor of a buried crab with a soft outline of an exposed invertebrate. It spots a disturbance. A shape rests on the bottom, seemingly vulnerable. The snapper calculates the trajectory, flares its fins, and commits to the strike. But the sand violently erupts before the fish can close the distance. What rises from the mud is not a defenseless meal. It is a ribbon of lethal certainty. Thick bands of alternating black and white violently pulse against the pale sediment. The shape elongates into a serpentine form, rearing its head, its body undulating in the unmistakable, rigid wave of a highly venomous banded sea snake. The snapper's nervous system screams. The strike is aborted mid-lunge. The predator violently banks away, burning its anaerobic reserves to put as much distance as possible between itself and the toxic threat. The snapper flees, absolutely convinced it has just narrowly escaped death. But as the silt begins to settle back onto the seafloor, the illusion dissolves. The serpent stops undulating. The black and white bands warp and melt into a mottled muddy brown. The single, elongated body splits at the seams, fracturing into 8 distinct, highly dexterous limbs. The creature that had just radiated pure, venomous authority collapses back into a soft, gelatinous puddle. The battle was won without a single physical blow. The decision was forged entirely through a lie. The architect of this cognitive hijacking is the mimic octopus, an invertebrate that has discarded the traditional oceanic arms race of speed, armor, and venom. It does not fight its enemies. It weaponizes their own memories against them. To understand the mimic octopus, you must look at an animal that has taken the concept of camouflage and inverted it. For almost every other species of cephalopod on the planet, survival is synonymous with invisibility. They use their chromatophores to blend into the coral, to match the texture of the rock, to become a shadow. They survive by ensuring the predator's brain never registers their existence. But the mimic octopus operates on a terrifyingly different psychological paradigm. It does not want to disappear. It wants to be seen. It steps directly into the predator's line of sight and projects a nightmare. This is not a mere parlor trick of pigmentation. It is a masterpiece of kinetic and psychological coercion. When a predator approaches, the mimic octopus does not simply change its color to look like a dangerous animal. It physically reconstructs its entire silhouette and mimics the exact biomechanical locomotion of that specific threat. If it needs to deter a threat in the open water, it will pull its 8 arms tightly together, flattening them out into a single leaf-like wedge, undulating its mantle to perfectly replicate the toxic, unpalatable flatfish. If it is caught near the substrate by a cruising grouper, it will spread its arms wide, stiffening them to look like rigid dorsal spines, and hover above the sand in the exact, menacing posture of the highly venomous red lionfish. This requires a neurological sophistication that borders on impossible. The octopus is a creature completely devoid of bones. Its body is a fluid, hydrostatic musculature, yet through its highly distributed nervous system, where each arm possesses its own localized cluster of neurons, effectively allowing the limbs to think for themselves. It can instantly force its soft tissues to imitate the rigid, mechanical movements of vertebrates. It executes a flawless, physical pantomime of species it is not even biologically related to. But the true genius of the mimic octopus is not found in its muscles. It is found in how it exploits the neurological vulnerabilities of its audience. The predators that patrol these coastal mudflats are operating under strict, unforgiving energy budgets. Every strike carries a massive caloric cost, and in an ecosystem teeming with highly toxic defense mechanisms, misidentifying a target can result in instant paralysis or death. Through millions of years of brutal natural selection, the brains of these predators have been hardwired with highly specific avoidance algorithms. A visual cue like alternating black and white stripes or splayed, venomous-looking spines acts as a biological trigger. When the predator sees this cue, the visual data is routed directly to the primitive, fear-processing centers of its brain, the equivalent of the amygdala. This triggers an immediate, overwhelming panic response that bypasses the higher, logical processing centers. Fear is faster than curiosity. By adopting these specific warning colors and shapes, the mimic octopus intentionally short-circuits the predator's decision-making framework. It hacks the avoidance algorithm. The attacking fish alters its course not because it has been physically repelled, but because its own brain has flooded its system with an artificial terror. The octopus dictates the predator's movement without ever making physical contact. It is control exerted purely at the level of neural circuitry. This manipulation is further enhanced by the theater in which it is performed. The mimic octopus thrives in the murky, highly turbid environments of river mouths and muddy estuaries. In crystal clear waters over a coral reef, a predator might have the time and the visual resolution to carefully inspect the disguise, to notice the subtle lack of scales or the slightly off-tempo undulation. But in the cloudy gloom of the mudflats, visual acuity is severely compromised. Predators must make life or death decisions based on rapid, incomplete information. The octopus inserts itself perfectly into this environmental ambiguity. It uses the murky water as a veil, ensuring the predator never gets a high-definition look at the lie. Even more staggering is the evidence suggesting that this mimicry is not a random panic reflex. It is a calculated, situational deployment. Marine biologists have observed the mimic octopus dynamically altering its disguise depending on the specific identity of the predator approaching it. When the octopus is harassed by highly territorial damselfish, it does not bother mimicking a lionfish, because damselfish are not particularly afraid of lionfish. Instead, the octopus will slip 6 of its arms down into a burrow, extend 2 arms outward in opposite directions, and pulse with black and white bands. It becomes a sea snake, the one specific predator that actively hunts damselfish within their own burrows. The octopus analyzes a threat, accesses a mental catalog of predators, and selects the one specific phobia guaranteed to break that particular attacker's resolve. It is profiling its enemies in real time. Yet, as the layers of the psychological warfare are peeled back, the ultimate narrative reversal is revealed. The mimic octopus, The creature that radiates such lethal authority is physically one of the most fragile animals in the sea. It possesses absolutely no venom. It has no shell. It lacks the explosive, sustained speed of pelagic hunters. It is fundamentally a soft bag of highly nutritious protein living in an environment packed with animals designed to tear flesh apart. Its spectacular ability to impersonate the deadliest killers in the ocean evolved precisely because it is utterly defenseless. Its greatest strength is inextricably rooted in its profound weakness. Because of this, the octopus is locked into a dangerous evolutionary phenomenon known as Batesian mimicry, a system where a completely harmless species survives by imitating a harmful one. But this system has a terrifying catch. The illusion only works if the predator's fear remains credible. The mimic octopus is entirely parasitic upon the genuine lethality of the animals it impersonates. It survives on borrowed fear. If the actual sea snakes and lionfish would disappear from the ecosystem, the predators would eventually stop fearing the stripes and the spines. They would call the bluff. The octopus's survival is intimately, desperately tied to the continued existence of the real monsters it pretends to be. It must balance this act with flawless precision. There are moments when the mimicry is simply too risky, or when a predator approaches that is immune to the illusion. In these split-second calculations, the octopus abandons the theater entirely. It flattens itself against the sediment, shifts its chromatophores to match the exact grain and hue of the mud, and vanishes into the substrate. This cognitive plasticity, the ability to seamlessly transition from psychological intimidation to absolute invisibility, is what makes it a master of its domain. In its most brilliant, audacious display, an octopus caught in the open with nowhere to hide will shove its body into a shallow depression, leaving only its two longest arms exposed. It points them in opposite directions, undulating both with the banded patterns of the sea snake. To the approaching predator, the math is suddenly terrifying. It is not facing a single threat. It believes it's just stumbled upon a nest of multiple venomous serpents. The octopus does not just manipulate its identity. It manipulates the perceived number of threats, multiplying the psychological deterrent until an attack becomes mathematically unthinkable. As the tide begins to recede, exposing the vast, rippling expanse of the mudflats, the water column grows quiet. A crab scurries across the silt. A shadow passes overhead. The mud begins to shift, and once again, a terrifying, venomous shape seems to materialize from the earth itself. The shadow hesitates, banks, and swims away into the gloom. The octopus retracts its performance. The bands fade. The rigid posture softens. There is no clash of teeth, no desperate chase, no blood spilled in the silt. The encounter ends in a profound, heavy absence. The mimic octopus has not overpowered its adversary. It has completely overwritten its intention. By stepping directly into the predator's mental landscape, by wearing the face of its deepest evolutionary fears, the octopus governs behavior from afar. It achieves absolute dominance without a single drop of violence. In an ocean where survival so often relies on what is the sharpest teeth or the fastest muscle, this soft-bodied phantom commands the sea through the sheer, unparalleled power of illusion. It proves definitively that the most impenetrable armor a creature can wear is not made of scales or bone. It is made of the terror existing in the mind of its enemy. The reef does not erupt in a frenzy of bubbles and thrashing tails. It tightens. It suffocates without a sound. A cloud of juvenile damselfish hovers just above a branching coral outcrop, their silver flanks flickering like scattered coins in the filtered, tropical sunlight. They are relaxed, suspended in a three-dimensional labyrinth of limestone that promises 1,000 different escape routes should a predator approach. But the water behind them begins to darken. The shadow that falls over them does not arrive with the blinding, kinetic speed of a striking barracuda, nor does it carry the massive, displacing bulk of a grouper. This shadow arrives with structure. Striped spines, banded in stark, warning colors of rust, white, and maroon, slowly unfurl like the iron bars of a closing gate. Massive, wing-like pectoral fins spread outward, membranes stretching taut between elongated rays, expanding the creature to an impossible, imposing width. The damselfish do not immediately scatter outward into blue. Instead, they compress inward. The open, infinite labyrinth of the coral reef has suddenly been edited. It is no longer an expanse of freedom. It has become a narrowing corridor, and there is only one direction left to swim. The architect of the suffocating geometry is the red lionfish. To understand the true menace of this predator, you must discard the assumption that hunting in the ocean requires velocity. The lionfish rarely sprints. It almost never engages in a high-speed pursuit. It governs its domain through an entirely different paradigm of warfare, absolute spatial domination. It does not chase its prey to exhaustion. It simply deletes their options until surrender is the only remaining mathematical outcome. Most pelagic hunters, from the tuna to the reef shark, overwhelm their targets with sheer acceleration. They are built for hydrodynamics, shaped like bullets to cut through the water's resistance. The lionfish is an anatomical rebellion against this design. Its body is adorned with fleshy tassels, elongated fin rays, and sweeping membranes that create massive amounts of hydrodynamic drag. It is a terrible swimmer, but those extravagant fins were not evolved for swimming. They were evolved for partitioning. When a lionfish locks its gaze onto a school of small reef fish, it begins a slow, agonizingly deliberate advance. It spreads its immense pectoral fins out to its sides, effectively transforming itself into a living wall. It occupies exponentially more volume than its actual body mass would suggest. To the damselfish, this expanding striped silhouette is not merely approaching. It is engulfing their visual field. Survival for a small fish on a coral reef is a constant, hypervigilant negotiation of distance. They constantly calculate the proximity of danger against the proximity of shelter. The branching corals offer microscopic refuges where they can dart beyond the reach of a larger jaw. The lionfish fundamentally disrupts the survival equation by physically inserting itself between the prey and the refuge. As it fans its fins outward, it establishes a solid barrier, blocking lateral escape routes. Every slow, pulsing sweep of its pectoral membranes pushes a subtle, invisible pressure wave forward through the water column. The sensitive lateral lines of the prey detect this encroaching wall of water, and their instincts compel them to back away, retreating exactly down the path the predator intends. But the psychological terror of the lionfish is reinforced by a highly lethal biological deterrent. Fringing the dorsal ridge of its back, and hidden within the pelvic and anal fins, are 18 hypodermic spines. Each of these rigid needles is sheathed in glandular tissue capable of delivering a highly potent, agonizingly painful neurotoxic venom. The brilliance of this venomous arsenal is how the lionfish employs it. It does not use these spines to strike its prey. It does not stab the damselfish. The venom is purely an instrument of spatial enforcement. Over millions of years of evolution, prey species have learned to instinctively avoid sharp, contrasting silhouettes that broadcast a risk of injury. The lionfish's flared, venomous spines create an invisible perimeter of profound danger. It establishes a no-entry zone defined not by the speed of the hunter, but by the devastating cost of touching it. The prey's movement options instantly collapse because a penalty for brushing against one of those spines is neuromuscular paralysis and searing agony. As the school of damselfish is systematically funneled into a tighter and tighter cluster, individuals desperately attempt to separate and break for the safety of the coral branches. But the lionfish anticipates the geometry of their panic. It subtly adjusts its orientation, angling its body so that its wide fins form a concave, semicircular trap. Its head lowers slightly, its jaws poise. It is waiting for the exact moment of prey are confined within the smallest possible arc. Unlike suction specialists that pull water from a distance, the lionfish relies on a rapid, explosive forward lunge. Powered by a single violent thrust of its caudal fin, it bridges the final few inches. Its mouth hinges open to a staggering width, instantly engulfing multiple fish in succession. The hunt is over in a fraction of a second, but in reality, the hunt was over before the strike was ever launched. The outcome was guaranteed the moment the lionfish solved the geometry of the trap. This strategy of spatial control carries profound and terrifying ecological consequences, particularly when its architecture fear is exported to an alien world. In its native ranges of the Indo-Pacific, the lionfish exists in a balanced, highly competitive ecosystem. But in the late 20th century, human activity introduced the red lionfish into the waters of the Western Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean. Here, the lionfish did not just become an invasive species. It became an ecological apocalypse. The native prey species of the Caribbean, the juvenile snappers, the wrasses, the tiny grazers that keep the coral reefs alive, had never encountered this specific brand of hunting. They lacked the evolutionary programming to recognize the spreading, striped fins as a lethal threat. They did not understand the geometry of the trap until the jaws were already snapping shut, because the native fish were utterly naive to the threat. The lionfish's spatial control translated into catastrophic, measurable declines in biodiversity. A single lionfish in an invaded reef can consume dozens of juvenile fish in a single day, gorge itself until its stomach expands to 30 times its normal volume, and radically alter the recruitment rates of the entire ecosystem. The predator that dictates movement at the microscale scales its influence upward, shifting the composition of entire oceanic basins. By systematically eradicating the herbivorous juvenile fish, the lionfish inadvertently removes the grazers that feed on marine algae. Without the grazers, the algae explodes, growing unchecked, competing with the fragile corals for space and sunlight, eventually smothering the very architecture of the reef itself. The predator that restricts the movement of a single damselfish ultimately rewrites the spatial balance of the entire ecosystem. Yet, as with all creatures of extreme specialization, the narrative of absolute dominance contains a fatal reversal. The lionfish's strategy is entirely dependent on its ability to command fear and respect through its conspicuous, highly visible display. It is the antithesis of camouflage. It advertises its presence to the entire reef. In its native Indo-Pacific habitat, this flamboyant display works because the local apex predators, massive groupers and certain sharks, have learned the agonizing lesson of its venomous spines. But in the invaded waters of the Caribbean, its conspicuous nature has made it the ultimate target for a completely different kind of apex predator, the human spear fisherman. Divers hunt them relentlessly precisely because their slow, deliberate movements and their arrogant, spreading fins make them impossible to miss. The very traits that make the lionfish an inescapable nightmare for a 2-inch damselfish make it a stationary, highly vulnerable target for a steel shaft. What is a flawless strategy for spatial manipulation becomes a catastrophic liability when faced with an intelligent, tool-wielding hunter that is immune to psychological intimidation. Even within its own underwater realm, its spatial dominance is not absolute. In ecosystems where prey have co-evolved alongside it, the escape responses are sharper, faster, and more desperate. The lionfish's sensory system must be constantly, finely tuned. It relies heavily on its large, forward-positioned eyes to track the minute, erratic movements of small prey against a cluttered, visually noisy backdrop of the coral reef. It stalks with the patience of a sniper, calculating windage and elevation in the form of water currents and prey orientation. There are even documented instances of cooperative hunting, where 2 lionfish will perfectly align their fin walls to herd a school of prey into a shared, inescapable pocket. It is a stunning display of collaborative spatial manipulation, proving that their commanded geometry is flexible, intelligent, and deeply calculated. As the remaining damselfish frantically search for an exit, the lionfish's fins create a narrowing, unyielding triangle. The fish attempt to dart sideways, but the stripe barrier subtly shifts, blocking the route. They attempt to retreat backward, but the solid limestone wall of the coral head denies them. The only remaining option is forward, directly toward the hovering, motionless head of the predator. The trap clicks shut. The jaws extend. The silver flashes vanish into the dark. There is no prolonged struggle. There is no chaotic chase tearing across the expanse of the reef. The hunt is defined purely by the enforcement of restriction. The red lionfish governs its world not by overwhelming its prey with raw speed, and not by hiding the shadows to strike from nowhere. It commands the reef by aggressively dictating where its prey may or may not go. In spreading its venomous, striped membranes, it builds invisible walls in the open water. It transforms the limitless freedom of the ocean into a suffocating, narrowing funnel. The damselfish did not lose their lives because they were too slow or too weak. They lost because every possible path to survival was preemptively, mathematically closed. Within that living architecture, the prey finds itself navigating not a reef, but carefully constructed, venomous corridor whose bitter end was chosen long before they ever realized they were trapped. A shadow detaches itself from the jagged, limestone overhang of the reef drop-off. It is the unmistakable silhouette of a requiem shark, a predator engineered for the relentless mathematics of pursuit. Its sensory organs have locked onto a target resting just above the coral lattice, a small, seemingly sluggish fish that appears entirely oblivious to the lethal mass accelerating toward it. The shark closes a distance, its jaws unhinging, ready to execute a biological imperative that has remained unchanged for 400 million years. It expects the prey to dart, to panic, to trigger a frantic, anaerobic chase that the shark is guaranteed to win. But the small fish does not flee. It does not seek the sanctuary of a dark crevice. It does not attempt to outswim the inevitable. Instead, it stops, and then the prey rewrites the fundamental laws of physics. In less than a single, violently compressed second, the streamlined body of the fish undergoes a catastrophic anatomical expansion. The creature rapidly gulps the surrounding ocean, pulling water into its body with terrifying speed. Its profile balloons, expanding outward in every direction simultaneously. What was a moment ago a bite-sized target is instantaneously transformed into a massive, floating sphere. And from the surface of this newly forged globe, hundreds of rigid, bone-crushing spines pivot outward, locking into place like the drawn bayonets of a microscopic army. The shark's jaws halt mid-strike. The forward momentum of the apex predator collapses into a confused, frantic hesitation. It violently banks away, its brain struggling to process the impossible geometry it has just encountered. The prey has not overpowered the shark. It has not outrun it. It has simply made itself physically impossible to consume. The architect of this staggering, instantaneous reversal is a porcupine fish. To comprehend the brilliance of this animal, you must understand in the vast, unforgiving theater of the ocean, dominance is almost exclusively measured by the size of a predator's gape. The marine world is governed by a simple, brutal rule. If a predator cannot fit an organism entirely within its mouth, it cannot eat it. Most oceanic hunters, from massive groupers to reef sharks, do not possess the anatomical tools to chew or tear their prey into manageable pieces. They rely on suction feeding or rapid, whole-body engulfment. Their success is entirely dependent upon a mathematical ratio between the width of their open jaws and the depth of their victim's body. The porcupine fish survives by hacking this mathematical ratio in real time. The inflation performed is not a mere optical illusion or a trick of the light. It is a profound feat of biomechanical engineering. The stomach of the porcupine fish is a marvel of evolutionary design. It is highly elastic, lined with specialized, accordion-like folds that allow the organ to stretch to a volume many times greater than its resting state, all without tearing or rupturing. When the fish's lateral line detects a sudden displacement of water, signaling an incoming strike, a hardwired neurological trigger is flipped. The fish opens its mouth and violently swallows water, pumping it directly into this highly distensible stomach. As the water floods in, a powerful sphincter muscle at the base of the esophagus clamps shut like a watertight vault, preventing any backflow. The internal hydrostatic pressure spikes dramatically. The pressure forces the skin to stretch outward, expanding the body into a perfect taut sphere. As the skin stretches, it pulls on the bases of specialized, modified scales embedded within the dermis. These scales are not the flat, overlapping plates found on other fish. They are elongated, rigid spines. In the fish's resting state, these spines lay flat against the body, pointing backward to reduce hydrodynamic drag. But as the skin expands, the mechanical tension forces the base of each spine to pivot upward. Within milliseconds, the fish erects a flawless, 360-degree perimeter of piercing deterrence. The shark's calculation changes instantly. The predator approaches expecting a soft, torpedo-shaped meal that will easily slide down its esophagus. It is suddenly confronted with a rigid, jagged navel mine. To attempt to bite down on the inflated porcupine fish is to invite agonizing injury. The spines are capable of piercing the soft tissues of the predator's mouth, gums, and throat. Even worse, if a particularly large or desperate predator actually manages to swallow the inflated sphere, the spines will lodge permanently within its digestive tract, leading to a slow, agonizing death by internal hemorrhage or starvation. The intimidation is not psychological. It is a rigid mechanical constraint. The hunter retreats not because it has lost its appetite, but because it recognizes a biological checkmate. But the genius of the porcupine fish does not end with this physical barricade. Beneath this terrifying exterior spectacle lies a secondary, invisible layer of profound defense, a biochemical insurance policy that ranks among the most lethal in the natural world. Tucked away within the internal organs of the porcupine fish, heavily concentrated in the liver, the ovaries, and the skin, is a compound known as tetrodotoxin. This is not a venom injected through the spines. It is a poison woven directly into the flesh of the animal. The porcupine fish does not actually produce this toxin itself. It acquires it through an evolutionary partnership, harboring symbiotic bacteria within its gut that synthesize a deadly chemical, which the fish then bioaccumulates over its lifetime. Tetrodotoxin is a neurotoxin of almost unfathomable potency, estimated to be over 1,000 times more lethal than cyanide. If a predator's hunger overrides its visual judgment, if a massive shark or a desperate marine mammal decides to ignore the bristling spines and attempt to crush and consume the fish anyway, the tetrodotoxin serves as the ultimate fatal punishment. The toxin operates by actively hunting down and blocking the voltage-gated sodium channels in the predator's nerve cell membranes. These microscopic channels are the biological wires responsible for transmitting electrical signals from the brain to the muscles. By plugging these channels, tetrodotoxin violently severs a connection between intent and action. The predator will experience a rapid, terrifying onset paralysis. The muscles that control its swimming will fail. The muscles that control its jaw will lock. And ultimately, the muscles responsible for respiration will cease to function. The predator will suffocate in the open ocean. The porcupine fish, therefore, is a creature that wields a dual-layered ultimatum. It presents a physical barrier that says, "You cannot swallow me." And beneath that, it presents a chemical guarantee that says, "If you try, you will not survive the meal." Intimidation is perfectly paired with guaranteed lethality. Yet, as with all specialized evolutionary strategies, the spectacular defense mechanism demands an enormous ecological cost. The ocean is an environment that aggressively punishes inefficiency. When the porcupine fish deploys its defense, swallowing the ocean and expanding into a spiked balloon, its swimming ability deteriorates catastrophically. The sleek, hydrodynamic profile required to cut through the dense medium of water is completely obliterated. The spherical shape generates massive amounts of drag. The small pectoral and caudal fins, normally used for precise, unhurried maneuvering, become practically useless in propelling the newly formed mass. The inflated porcupine fish is, essentially, stranded in the water column. It drifts at the mercy of the current, unable to execute agile escape maneuvers or swim against the tide. This physical helpless state means that the inflation strategy is a high-stakes, all-or-nothing gamble. It must succeed instantly. The fish stakes its entire existence on the predator's ability to perform a rapid risk assessment and choose retreat. If a predator is somehow immune to the pain of the spines, or large enough to swallow the sphere whole without fear of choking, the porcupine fish has sacrificed its only other defense, flight. It cannot outrun what it cannot intimidate. Because of the severe hydrodynamic penalty, the timing of the inflation is a neurological tightrope walk. The sensory systems governing this reflex must be exquisitely calibrated. The lateral line must accurately measure the mass and velocity of the approaching threat. If the porcupine fish inflates too early, the predator may simply adjust its approach, waiting patiently for the prey to exhaust itself and deflate. If the fish inflates too late, the predator's jaws will snap shut before the transformation is complete, crushing the internal organs before the water can fill the stomach. The fish must balance an incredible state of hypervigilance with absolute restraint, conserving its energy and holding its nerve until a precise threshold of imminent danger is crossed. When it is not actively defending its life, the everyday existence of the porcupine fish reveals a fascinating, paradoxical confidence. Even before inflation, these fish exhibit a bold, almost arrogant behavior that is deeply unusual for small inhabitants of the coral reef. They do not hide in shadows. They do not join massive, synchronized schools for the safety of the dilution effect. They patrol the reef alone, utilizing a slow, deliberate, hovering style of swimming, propelled by the undulating movements of their pectoral, dorsal, and anal fins. This unhurried locomotion is the swagger of an animal completely secure in its defensive arsenal. This confidence allows a porcupine fish to exploit a highly specific, heavily armored niche within the reef's food web. Unlike the sleek predators that chase down fleeing bait fish, the porcupine fish targets the fortresses of the seabed. Its diet consists of hard-shelled invertebrates, marine snails, crabs, hermit crabs, and the heavily armored sea urchins. To breach these defenses, the porcupine fish possesses an anatomical weapon hidden just behind its lips. It does not have individual, pointed teeth. Instead, its teeth are fused together into a solid, incredibly dense, beak-like crushing plate, powered by massive, bulging jaw muscles. When a porcupine fish targets a sea urchin, it does not fear the venomous spines that deter so many other predators. It simply hovers over the urchin, calculates the angle, and drives its heavy beak directly through the calcium carbonate shell, cracking the armor with the raw, mechanical force of an industrial vise. This dietary specialization intimately links the porcupine fish to the broader architecture of the coral reef ecosystem. By actively hunting and crushing sea urchins, the porcupine fish serves as a vital biological regulator. In areas where urchin populations are allowed to grow unchecked, their relentless grazing can erode the limestone foundations of the reef and decimate the delicate coral polyps. By keeping these armored grazers in balance, the slow-moving, heavily defended porcupine fish indirectly protects the structural integrity of the entire coral ecosystem. The fish that turns into a weapon of deterrence against predators is simultaneously acting as a gardener of a stone. The inflation behavior, while primarily defensive, also bleeds into the complex social dynamics of the species. Porcupine fish have been observed utilizing partial inflation during intense territorial disputes or social interactions with their own kind. By gulping a small amount of water and slightly raising their spines, they artificially increase their perceived body size. In the animal kingdom, size is the universal currency of dominance. A slightly larger profile can effectively discourage a rival male from escalating a conflict over a prime hiding spot or a rich feeding ground. Control through intimidation is not exclusively reserved for terrifying the apex predators. It operates within the subtle hierarchy of their own species as well. But the ultimate vulnerability of this invincible design is found at the very beginning of its life cycle. The absolute dominance of the adult porcupine fish does not extend to its offspring. During the breeding season, adult porcupine fish gather in shallow coastal waters to spawn, releasing millions of microscopic eggs directly into the pelagic currents. In these massive synchronized aggregations, the adults rarely inflate, focusing all their metabolic energy on gamete dispersal. The eggs and resulting larvae are entirely at the mercy of the open ocean. They do not possess the highly elastic stomachs required for inflation. They have not yet grown the rigid dermal spines. And most critically, they have not yet accumulated the deadly tetrodotoxin from the symbiotic bacteria in their environment. The descendants of the ultimate fortress are born completely naked. They drift as microscopic plankton, serving as a primary food source for thousands of pelagic filter feeders. The formidable, untouchable adult depends entirely upon the blind probability of millions of offspring to ensure that just one or two will survive the gauntlet of the open sea. It is a stunning evolutionary irony. The creature that masters the geometry of survival in adulthood must surrender its lineage entirely to the chaotic, unprotected drift of the tide. Furthermore, the perfection of its chemical defense is constantly being tested by the relentless engine of evolution. In certain localized ecosystems, the absolute lethality of tetrodotoxin has sparked a biochemical arms race. Over millions of years, specific populations of predators, such as certain species of sea snakes or specialized sharks, have begun to develop genetic mutations that alter the shape of their sodium channels. These microscopic changes grant them a partial resistance to the toxin. To these specialized hunters, a porcupine fish is no longer an instant death sentence. It is merely a risky, heavily spiked meal. This ongoing evolutionary dialogue proves that in nature, no defense is ever absolute, and intimidation is always contextual. As the shadow of the requiem shark finally recedes into the dark blue void of the open water, the immediate threat evaporates. The porcupine fish remains suspended in the water column for a few lingering moments, a floating, bristling sphere ensuring perimeter is truly clear. Then the process reverses. The powerful sphincter muscle at the top of the stomach relaxes. The fish slowly, methodically expels the water out through its gills and mouth. The taut skin loosens. The rigid, menacing spines fold backward, settling seamlessly against the flanks. The massive, spherical volume deflates, and the fish resumes its streamlined, albeit boxy, resting shape. The dramatic, physics-defying transformation leaves absolutely no trace in the water column. Only the lingering, invisible memory of an aborted predation. The porcupine fish gives a slow, unhurried sweep of its pectoral fins and resumes its confident patrol across the jagged terrain of the coral rubble. In the shallow lagoons and steep reef slopes, where ambush predators lurk in every shadow and high-speed hunters patrol the boundaries of the light, the porcupine fish navigates with a paradoxical mixture of total vulnerability and absolute invincibility. It cannot outrun the sharks. It cannot match the explosive acceleration of the barracuda. It cannot vanish into the substrate like the stonefish. Instead, it wields mechanical and psychological deterrence in a single, fluid motion. The retreat of the apex predator was not a failure of hunger. It was the forced acknowledgement of a biological constraint. A meal that cannot fit is a meal that cannot be eaten. By rewriting its own physical dimensions in a matter of seconds, the porcupine fish dictates the exact terms of the engagement. It proves that true dominance on the reef does not always belong to the fastest, the strongest, or the most aggressive. Sometimes, survival belongs to the creature that simply refuses to be swallowed, turning its own body into a fortress of thorns, and forcing the greatest hunters in the ocean to turn around and swim away. The shrimp lunges first. It commits its delicate, armored body to the strike with absolute predatory certainty. Its antennae are angled sharply forward. Its raptorial legs are flexed like microscopic loaded springs, and every firing neuron in its simple nervous system is singularly focused on a target drifting just millimeters ahead. Suspended in the gentle, sweeping current of the reef is what appears to be a small, vulnerable worm. The worm twitches. It is an irregular, erratic pulse that perfectly mimics the agonizing microspasms of injured prey. The shrimp's biological programming registers the exact frequency of that twitch. It calculates the interception angle. It accelerates, closing the final gap in a blinding, ballistic snap. The ocean seems to hold its breath for a fraction of a heartbeat. And then, the seafloor violently rips open. The water does not just move. It implodes inward, collapsing into a sudden, terrifying vacuum. The shrimp, along with the worm and a massive volume of the surrounding ocean, instantly vanishes into a cavernous black maw that simply did not exist a millisecond prior. The jaws snap shut with the finality of a steel trap. The dust settles. The predator never moved toward the shrimp. The shrimp voluntarily, aggressively moved toward the predator. The mastermind behind this flawless, engineered suicide is the frogfish. To comprehend the terrifying genius of this animal, you must completely abandon the traditional concept of the hunt. The frogfish does not chase. It does not pursue. It rarely even swims with anything resembling urgency. While the sharks, the tunas, and the barracudas dominate the ocean to the sheer, explosive application of kinetic energy and forward momentum, the frogfish operates as a psychological architect. It does not overpower its victims with brute force. It constructs a cognitive snare, a behavioral trap so precise, so flawlessly calibrated, that the prey willingly crosses a final, fatal distance. If you were to observe a frogfish resting on the reef, your brain would struggle to categorize it as a living vertebrate. Its body is grotesque, an anatomical rebellion against the sleek, hydrodynamic torpedoes that normally rule the sea. It is bulbous, highly asymmetrical, and violently textured. Its skin mimics the exact porous, chaotic surface of a decaying sea sponge or a cluster of algae-choked coral. It is modeled in dull yellows, toxic reds, or deep, shadowed greens. But this grotesque exterior is merely the stage dressing. The true instrument of its dominion is hidden at the very top of its head. Extending from the crown of its skull is a highly modified, elongated dorsal spine known to marine biologists as the elysium. It operates as a biological fishing rod, complete with a specialized, fleshy appendage at the tip called the esca. This esca is the lure, but it is not a passive, dangling ornament. It is a living, animated puppet, controlled by a network of incredibly fine, highly specialized muscles at the base of the spine. The frogfish can twitch, pulse, and ride this lure with a level of granular control that defies belief. In some species of frogfish, the esca is shaped exactly like a tiny, transparent shrimp. In others, it perfectly resembles a polychaete worm or a small, struggling fish. But the physical resemblance is only half the weapon. The true lethality lies in the motion. The frogfish does not simply wiggle the lure at random, hoping for a blind strike. It calibrates the movement. It reads the water currents and observes the behavioral patterns of the surrounding reef life. When a target like a predatory shrimp or a small carnivorous fish approaches, the frogfish begins to broadcast a highly specific biological lie. Feeding behavior in small reef predators is governed by a strict set of visual and kinetic triggers. They are hardwired to respond to the irregular, short-burst movements that broadcast injury, vulnerability, and easy calories. The frogfish exploits this hardwired cognitive bias. It twitches a lure in the exact algorithmic rhythm of dying prey. It is broadcasting a signal that bypasses the target's caution and directly activates its feeding reflex. The shrimp that lunged at the lure was not fleeing from danger. It was actively pursuing what it believed to be a massive caloric reward. The frogfish's control is, therefore, not physical in the beginning. It is entirely psychological. It manipulates the decision-making framework of the victim, steering its innate, evolutionary instincts directly toward catastrophe. This strategy is known in behavioral ecology as aggressive mimicry. Unlike standard defensive camouflage, which is designed to make an animal disappear from the attention of the world, aggressive mimicry is designed to actively invite approach. It begs to be looked at. The frogfish transforms itself from a hidden observer into the primary object of desire. It becomes the center of gravity in a localized web of deception. As a manipulated prey closes a final millimeter of distance, entirely focused on a writhing lure, the second phase of the trap is triggered. The frogfish's mouth is an evolutionary marvel of leverage, elasticity, and vacuum mechanics. When the strike is initiated, the jaw apparatus hinges forward and the entire buccal cavity, the mouth and the throat, expands in astonishing, almost incomprehensible speed. In a staggering 6 milliseconds, the internal volume of the frogfish's mouth increases up to 12 times its original size. This instantaneous expansion creates a catastrophic drop in internal pressure. The laws of fluid dynamics dictate that the surrounding water must rush in to fill the void. This suction feeding mechanism is widely considered to be the fastest recorded strike of any teleos fish on the planet. The water and the prey suspended within it is violently vacuumed inward with a force that far exceeds the maximum escape velocity of any crustacean or reef fish. The shrimp is not simply bitten. It is inhaled. The biomechanics of this strike are so fast that the human eye cannot perceive the movement without high-speed cameras. The jaw ligaments store elastic energy like a drawn crossbow, releasing in a single coordinated, explosive snap. The frogfish's body remains almost entirely motionless until that exact microsecond. From a distance, the animal appears utterly inert, almost comical in its stillness. Yet, that stillness is not lethargy. It is the ultimate expression of biological restraint. By minimizing its own movement, the frogfish eliminates the subtle hydrodynamic pressure waves that would normally alert the highly sensitive lateral lines of approaching prey. It generates zero warning signals. Energy conservation is the absolute, defining mandate for an animal that relies on sporadic, unpredictable, but high-yield feeding events. A frogfish may remain anchored to the exact same square inch of coral for weeks at a time, entering a state of deep metabolic meditation, waiting with terrifying patience for the perfect, fatal alignment of curiosity and hunger in its victims. This method of hunting dictates a unique form of spatial dominance. The frogfish does not need to patrol vast, open territories. It exerts total absolute control over a hyper-localized microenvironment. By occupying the summit of a coral head or burying itself within a dense cluster of sponges, it becomes a localized focal point of extreme risk, deeply embedded within what the rest of the reef considers to be a safe grazing ground. Reef fish constantly build and maintain mental maps of their environment. They memorize the safe patches, the cleaning stations, the feeding grounds where predators are historically absent. The frogfish is the ultimate disruptor of this cognitive map. It inserts a lethal, invisible anomaly directly into the zones of comfort. It does not chase the prey into a dark alley. It places a trap in the middle of the town square. The disguise is aided by specialized skin appendages called dermal spinules, which perfectly mimic the microscopic texture of the surrounding benthic organisms. Some species of frogfish take this integration a step further, actively hosting symbiotic marine algae on their skin, cultivating a living garden that enhances the illusion of plant life. They become inextricably woven into the visual and chemical background of the reef. They allow the prey traffic to flow completely unimpeded around them, letting the victim choose the exact moment of its own demise. However, the profound narrative reversal of the frogfish lies in the extreme evolutionary trade-offs required to perfect this decision trap. The frogfish is a master of deception, but it is a prisoner to its own anatomy because it has invested entirely in stealth, suction, and stomach capacity. It has sacrificed almost all ability to function as a normal fish. It is a spectacularly pathetic swimmer. Its swim bladder is highly modified, and in some species, completely absent, making it negatively buoyant. It sinks like a stone. Its pectoral and pelvic fins have evolved to resemble crude, elbowed limbs. It literally walks or hobbles across the seafloor, dragging its heavy, bulbous body over the rocks in a slow, agonizing crawl. It is highly vulnerable in the open water column, utterly lacking the sustained endurance or the rapid burst speed required to escape the pelagic predators that patrol the blue. The decision trap evolved precisely because active pursuit was anatomically impossible. What appears to the casual observer as laziness is, in fact, a desperate, strategic compensation for profound physical deficit. This reliance on the prey taking the initiative introduces a massive element of risk into the frogfish's survival equation. If the local prey population suddenly declined, or if the resident fish somehow learned to recognize the subtle cues of the lure, the frogfish's feeding opportunities evaporate. Unlike an active, cruising hunter like a shark, which can simply swim miles away to locate a new, more productive hunting ground, the frogfish is spatially tethered. Its success depends entirely on remaining undetected long enough to entice the ignorant. Its control over the environment is absolute, but it is only effective as long as the ignorance of its prey persists. If the illusion fails, the frogfish starves. Furthermore, the lure itself, the esca, is a delicate, highly exposed piece of tissue. It is constantly being waved in the faces of aggressive, hungry predators. It is not uncommon for a faster fish, or a particularly aggressive crab, to strike the lure with enough speed to sever it completely before the frogfish can trigger its vacuum mechanism. When the esca is bitten off, the frogfish is instantly disarmed. It loses its primary mechanism of psychological control. But the resilience of the species is showcased in its ability to regenerate. Over a period of weeks or months, a new lure will slowly grow back from the stump of the Elysium. This incredible capacity for regeneration underscores the absolute evolutionary necessity of the esca. It is not an expendable piece of decoration. It is the sole interface between the predator's hunger and the prey's psychology. Without the lure, the frogfish is just a helpless lump of flesh waiting to die. The developmental cycle of the frogfish reveals even deeper layers of strategic mimicry. Juvenile frogfish do not always look like their sponge-mimicking parents. In the early, most vulnerable stages of their lives, they exhibit radical ontogenetic shifts in their camouflage. Many juveniles are brightly colored, perfectly mimicking the warning patterns of highly toxic nudibranch or unpalatable, venomous flatworms. As they move clumsily across the exposed sand, they rely on Batesian mimicry, pretending to be poisonous to deter the visual predators that would easily snatch them up. Only as they increase in body mass, as their mouths grow wide enough to generate the lethal vacuum, and as their lures fully develop, do they shed the bright warning colors. They transition from mimicking toxicity to mimicking the inert landscape. They shift from a strategy of active deterrence into a strategy of lethal invitation. As their biology changes, their relationship with the psychology of the reef changes with it. When the shrimp vanished into that cavernous, expanding mouth, the entire violent event lasted a fraction of a second. There was no chaotic chase across the branching coral. There was no prolonged, desperate struggle. There was no exhaustion. The shrimp made a choice. It analyzed the visual data. It interpreted the twitches of the lure as a guaranteed meal. And in doing so, it voluntarily crossed the invisible mathematical threshold separating autonomy from absolute inevitability. The frogfish did not force the movement through the sheer, terrifying intimidation of spreading fins. It did not stun the nervous system with a blast of venom. It did not herd the victim through the coordinated, acoustic pulses of a highly social pod. It simply set a choice upon the table, and the prey made it. As the gentle currents continued to sweep across the reef, carrying the scent of algae and the distant vibrations of the open sea, the frogfish resumes its perfect, statuesque stillness. The jaw is locked closed. The stomach begins a slow, acidic process of digestion. Above its head, the tiny, fleshy lure begins to sway once more, moving with a subtle, algorithmic animation that whispers a lie into the water column. Nearby, a small wrasse resumes feeding, darting between the coral heads, completely unaware that the architecture of risk has shifted by only a few centimeters. The decision trap is reset. In this quiet, sun-dappled theater of coral and sand, dominance is not exerted to the loud, violent displays of territorial aggression. It is not won by the fastest tailbeat or the sharpest teeth. It is exerted entirely through temptation. The frogfish does not command the reef to move out of its way. It gently, systematically convinces individual organisms to step forward into the dark. Each microscopic strike is not an act of pursuit. It is a culmination of a carefully engineered behavioral cascade, a scenario where biological hunger effortlessly overrides evolutionary caution, and where curiosity permanently eclipses suspicion. The shrimp's final, ballistic act was entirely voluntary. It lunged because its own hardwired instincts demanded it. And in that fatal demand, the frogfish's ultimate strategy is laid bare. It does not chase its prey into submission. It painstakingly designs the exact psychological circumstances under which its prey will eagerly, willingly surrender themselves to the void. The ocean is an arena defined entirely by motion. Survival is typically a chaotic, high-stakes equation of kinetic energy, where life and death are decided by who can swim faster, turn sharper, or bite harder. The inhabitants of the coral reef are hardwired to scan the blue void for movement. They watch for the sweeping shadow of a shark, the sudden, silver flash of barracuda, or the undulating creep of a moray eel. They believe, as all moving things do, that danger is something that arrives. They believe that as long as they can see the threat coming, they have a chance to flee. A solitary butterfly fish, its nervous system exhausted from navigating the exposed, sunlit columns of the reef, descends toward a scattered patch of limestone rubble. It lowers its dorsal spines. It slows the frantic beating of its pectoral fins. It crosses a psychological threshold between the dangerous, open water and the perceived sanctuary of a seabed. The rubble zone is a graveyard of dead coral, a chaotic jumble of broken calcium carbonate, encrusting algae and shifting sand. To the butterfly fish, it is neutral territory. There is no shadow here to trigger its lateral line. There is no sudden displacement of water. The fish drifts just inches above a crust of algae-stained stone, and then the rock beneath it inhales. The substrate violently rips open. The water does not simply shift. It implodes downward into a cavernous, dark void that did not exist a millisecond prior. In a single, catastrophic vacuum event, the butterfly fish vanishes into the earth. The seabed did not hide a predator. The seabed was a predator. Buried perfectly within the chaotic architecture of the rubble, utterly indistinguishable from the dead coral surrounding it, lies the reef stone fish. In an ecosystem where survival usually dictates that you must either outswim your enemies or outsmart them with complex social geometries, the stonefish opts for a terrifying third path. It has completely abandoned the concept of pursuit. It does not defend its territory with aggressive, territorial displays. Instead, it completely erases a distinction between its own biological body and the geological landscape. Control, for the stonefish, is not imposed through intimidation, speed, or coordinated intellect. It is imposed through perfect, uncompromising morphological surrender. To comprehend the stonefish is to witness a masterclass in evolutionary subtraction. It is an anatomical rejection of everything that makes a fish look like a fish. The sleek, hydrodynamic curves required for efficient swimming have been entirely discarded. traded away for absolute concealment. In their place is a grotesque, asymmetrical mass of flesh texture with warty protrusions, deep, cavernous pitting and irregular ridges. Its skin is a flawless mirror of the encrusting sponges, the calcified coral and algae, and the decaying rubble of the reef floor. The pigmentation is never a static color. It is a highly variable, mottled tapestry of dead browns, muted grays, and toxic greens that shift and adapt to perfectly match the specific microhabitat it has chosen to occupy. But it takes this camouflage to its absolute logical extreme. It does not just look like a rock. It allows the reef to treat it like one. Over time, actual marine algae, tiny hydroids, and microscopic invertebrates will begin to colonize the skin of the stonefish, weaving the living animal directly into the fabric of the substrate. Once it settles into a crevice or buries itself partially in the coarse sand using its heavily modified pectoral fins, it shuts down almost all physical movement. It will not twitch. It will not adjust its posture. Only its upward-facing eyes, buried deep within fleshy, protective pits, betray any sign of animation, scanning the water column through a thin, microscopic film of water. Even its respiration is weaponized through subtlety. It achieves oxygen exchange through a gentle, agonizingly slow pumping of its gills that is precisely calibrated not to disturb a single grain of surrounding sand. The reef does not register its breathing. The reef registers it as inanimate stone. The mechanism of its control over the environment is entirely spatial. On a bustling coral reef, small fish and invertebrates constantly use the rubble zones as corridors of transit, safe highways that connect the branching, sheltering sanctuaries of the coral heads. They rely on these stretches of dead stone to shield their approach from the circling sharks and the plunging pelagic hunters. But when a stonefish installs itself within that specific corridor, it fundamentally alters the architecture of risk. It converts a sanctuary into a biological landmine. It does not force its prey to make a mistake, nor does it chase them into a corner. It redefines what constitutes a safe zone, turning the prey's own cognitive map into the instrument of their demise. The strike, when it finally comes, is a triumph of biomechanical engineering. The stonefish relies on buccal suction feeding, a method common among ambush predators, but perfected here to a horrifying degree of efficiency. Because the prey firmly believes it is hovering over neutral, dead ground, its neurological escape thresholds are completely lowered. The butterfly fish is not primed to flee. When the stonefish triggers its attack, its massive, upward-facing jaws hinge outward, and its buccal cavity, the mouth and throat, expands at lightning speed. This expansion creates an instantaneous, massive negative pressure zone. The surrounding water and everything suspended within it is sucked violently inward. The fish is swallowed whole before its Mothner cells, the giant neurons responsible for initiating a startle reflex, can even process the visual cue to flee. The prey is betrayed by its own misplaced confidence in the terrain. Yet, the true infamy of the reef stonefish does not come from how it captures its prey, but from how it defends its stolen territory. Lying along the dorsal ridge of its back are 13 stout, incredibly rigid spines, each one resembling a jagged shard of broken limestone. But these spines are hollow, acting as biological hypodermic needles, and they're connected at their base to heavily modified, pressurized venom glands. This is not just a deterrent. This is the most potent, excruciatingly painful venom of any fish on the planet. The stonefish does not use this venom offensively. It does not inject its prey to paralyze them before consumption. The venom is purely defensive architecture. It is designed to transform the stonefish from a hidden predator into a permanent, unmovable fixture of the reef. If a larger predator, a cruising reef shark or a massive, hungry grouper, attempt to bite down on what it thinks is a concealed fish, the physical pressure of the jaw on the spine compresses the venom gland. The venom is mechanically forced up through the hollow groove and injected deep into the soft tissue of the attacker's mouth. The biological payload delivered is a devastating mixture of myotoxins and cardiotoxins. It induces immediate, mind-shattering pain that defies description, severe tissue necrosis, and in many cases, total cardiovascular collapse. The defense is so overwhelmingly disproportionate to the threat that any predator lucky enough to survive the initial envenomation will never, under any circumstances, attempt to disturb that patch of rubble again. Because of this ultimate chemical deterrent, the stonefish is granted a permanent, uncontested thrown upon the seafloor. It can remain in the exact same location for weeks or even months without ever being forced to retreat, relocate, or surrender its ground. It owns the earth simply by refusing to be moved. This absolute immobility is also the cornerstone of a brilliant metabolic strategy. By minimizing its movement to almost zero, the stonefish reduces its energy expenditure to a microscopic fraction of what an active hunter requires. In the nutrient-fluctuating environment of a coral reef, where caloric availability can change with the shifting tides, conserving energy can determine survival during lean periods. The stonefish's low activity level is not lethargy. It is a highly evolved, strategic austerity. It can afford to wait. It can outlast the hunger that drives other predators into making fatal, energy-wasting mistakes. But as with all extreme evolutionary specializations, this absolute dominance carries a devastating ecological tax. The narrative reversal of the stonefish is found in the very design that makes it invincible. The immobility that serves as its greatest weapon is also its ultimate, glaring vulnerability. If a severe storm surge tears a reef apart, or if shifting, violent currents force the stonefish to abandon its carefully chosen microhabitat, the illusion of the rock is instantly broken. When it is forced to swim, the stonefish is a tragic, incredibly clumsy creature. Its heavy, bulbous body is entirely unsuited for hydrodynamic propulsion. It cannot glide. It cannot dart. It lumbers through the water column. Its mottled, rubble-mimicking camouflage now completely useless and highly conspicuous against the stark blue backdrop of the open ocean. In these rare moments of transit, the invincible master of the seabed is exposed as a terrible swimmer, highly vulnerable to the crushing jaws of the very apex predators it normally deters when buried. The morphology that perfects its disguise completely destroys its agility. This vulnerability is magnified exponentially during its reproductive cycle. To ensure the continuation of its lineage, the stonefish cannot hide its offspring in the safety of the rubble. During spawning events, it is forced to release massive clouds of buoyant eggs directly into the open water column. These eggs drift helplessly in the pelagic currents, entirely exposed to the billions of filter feeders, small predators, and the chaotic violence of the upper layers of the ocean. The ultimate master of grounded territory, the creature that dominates the solid earth, must surrender its future generations entirely to the mercy of the void. Control at the adult scale does not translate to generational security. The offspring face the exact pelagic nightmares that the adult's entire physiology was built to escape. It is only after running the horrific gauntlet of the open ocean that the surviving, microscopic larvae will eventually sink back down to the seafloor. They will settle onto limestone, and over time, their bodies will slowly warp, calcify, and deform. They will acquire the warty textures, the muted pigments, and the crushing stillness of their ancestors. The line between the living organism and the dead rock will slowly blur until it vanishes completely. As the shadow of a passing tiger shark glides over the reef, a dozen small fish dive toward the seabed, seeking refuge in a cluster of broken coral. They tuck themselves into the crevices, their gills pumping rapidly, completely unaware that the rock they are pressing their bodies against is breathing with them. The stonefish does not react to the massive shark passing above, nor does it immediately strike at the terrified fish resting directly against its jaw. It possesses the patience of geology. In an ocean where survival is typically a frantic, high-speed arms race of muscle, teeth, and agility, the reef stonefish governs to the ultimate act of subtraction. It dominates the environment by completely erasing its own presence from it. The coral reef promises safety and shelter to those fleeing the chaos of the open water. But the stonefish is a terrifying, silent reminder that safe zones are nothing more than optical illusions drawn in sand and rubble. It waits in absolute silence, a living landmine buried in the architecture of the ocean, proving that the most inescapable traps are the ones you willingly choose to hide inside. The history of our planet is written in stone, ice, and bone, and we have only just scratched the surface. There are still countless mysteries echoing through deep time, waiting to be unearthed. If you want to uncover the darkest and most fascinating chapters of our world, subscribe to Earth's Documentary right now. Settle in, click the video on your screen, and let's continue the journey into the unknown.